My name is Charles Harrow with the Veterans History Project. Today is May 13th, 2006. I'm in Parksley, Virginia, interviewing Mr. Paul R. Lewis. For the record, Mr. Lewis, would you state your complete name?
Paul R. Lewis.
And what is your current address?
Post Office Box 641, Parksley, Virginia, 23421.
And what is, where were you born?
Hopkins, Virginia.
And when were you born?
June 16th, 1924.
What branch of service were you in during the war?
Army.
And you were involved in Normandy campaign?
Yes, I was.
At that time, what division, battalion, regiment were you attached to?
I was attached to the 1st Infantry Division, Regiment 16.
Is it true that you came in on the Normandy invasion on Omaha Beach?
That's true.
Did you serve in any other wars besides World War II?
No.
And what was your highest rank?
Corporal.
Mr. Lewis, I'd like to go back in history to your earliest moments that you can remember. Back when you were a kid. Do you remember the first incident that you can recall about your mother?
I guess was the hard times that we were having in the Depression. You know, she worked hard.
What did she do?
She was a homemaker, but there was 7 children, and but she was married twice. Her first husband was bit by a stingray, and that killed him.
What was his name?
Winford Russell. She was a Russell. She was a Shrees, but she married a Russell.
What was her first name?
Catherine.
Catherine.
Shrees, and then she married a Russell, and she had 2 girls by her first husband, Velma and Estelle.
Are they still both alive?
No, none of them. I'm the only one left. And we had my father was married, and he had 2 boys and 2 girls, and his first wife died in the 1918 flu epidemic. And then my mother and father were married, and they had me, the last one.
So you were the only child of your mother and father?
Yes, yes. I had half brothers and half sisters.
All older than you, though?
Yeah, all older, yes.
Can you recall or describe what your mother looked like when you first could remember her?
Well, she always she had real black hair, and you know, at that time they made their own clothes and their own bonnets and everything, and but she was a nice looking lady at that time.
Was she thin?
At that time she was. Later on in life she got larger and then ended up thin again.
When you were born in 1924, I don't think you would remember too much about the 1920s, being only 6 when it came to an end.
No. See, that would have made me only 6 years old to 1930, and I remember wearing a lot of clothes that were handed down from the previous half brothers and so on and so on.
Were they a lot older than you?
The one closest to me was 8 years older than I was, and his name was Fulton, and The other brother was quite a bit older than I was, Samuel. And the two sisters, of course, were older than I were too, because they were by my father and his first wife.
Tell me about what time your mother and father were married.
Donald, go and look in that bottom drawer.
But were they married for a while before you came along?
It wouldn't have been too long, but I got their marriage certificates in the other room.
That's okay. Tell me about your dad. What was his name?
Dad worked on the water in the bay all his life, and in the summer it was working in the crab business, soft crabs and that kind of stuff, and in the winter he had at one time he had a skipjack, which was the old boats on the bay, and it was a group of them that was coming back from the Potomac River one time, and they got to Crisfield, and they were leaving from Crisfield to come to Hopkins, or Hunting Creek was what the real name for it. And they run into a storm, and his boat sank, and he tied himself to the mast. And it was in February, and when the search crews went out the next day looking for the boats, they found him, and he was hanging on to the rope, and they got him in a boat and carried him to Crisfield, Maryland, to the hospital. And they couldn't get the rope out of his hand until they got him in the hospital. They had to cut it. And in the winter, a group of boats would go from Hunting Creek to up one of the rivers, Potomac, James River, York River, Ardennes. And they would live right aboard the boats. And they would send maybe $5 home a month. And one time my father told me that when they got all frozen in, it was 3 boats there that were frozen in, and they had no way to get anything to eat, and said if it hadn't been for a farmer feeding them potatoes and vegetables, he thought they would starve right there. That was in the 30s. That was in the Depression, the early 30s, you know. So Dad worked hard all of his life. And I'll tell you this little joke. A lot of times when I was going down working with him in the water, it would be cold in the wintertime, and he would tell me as we were walking towards trying where the boat was tied off, he'd say, "Paul, it's nothing between us and breaking this wind off this morning but Baltimore." So he was a kind of a jokester feller, but he always told me if you can't take a joke, don't give a joke. And he was good to his stepchildren, and that my mother had. They all called him Dad and whatnot. It was a family thing. At one time, we had 9 sitting around the kitchen table at one time.
You recall that? You recall that many children in the house?
Yes. Mm-hmm. At one time, that didn't last long, but at one time we were all there at one time.
What was your dad's name?
Samuel, but everybody called him Captain Sam, Captain Sam Lewis, and he like I say, he worked hard. And
do you remember that skipjack that he had?
No. That happened before I was born. That happened before I was born.
So while you were born and realizing what was happening, he was just working for other folks?
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Now he did run a soft crab business by himself at one time, where they had the floats where it would only be somebody along the water that would know what I'm talking about, or a fisherman. They buy the hard crabs, and then they when the hard crab turns to a peeler at a certain time in its life, it turns to a soft crab. Well, then that's what he was running, was what they called a soft crab house. And then they were shipped to New York, Philadelphia, or they were iced down on seagrass in boxes and shipped to cities along the East Coast.
Can you remember the first home that you lived in?
Well, where I was born, it was the only home that I ever lived in until my wife and I married and we moved here.
So you were living in the same place you were born?
Yes.
Was that owned by your father? Or?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And he often told me he paid $600 for it, and that's what it cost a man to build it. It had no electricity, or no running water, or we had a pump, and no bath.
How did you heat up the water to wash?
Well, we had a cook stove, and it had a reservoir on one end of it, and when you cook meals, the water in that little reservoir got warm, and that was used for bath water or whatever.
How often did you bathe back in the 1920s and 30s that you remember?
Well, in the winter time, it was pretty infrequent, but in the summertime, we went bathing every day in the water, in the creek, and but in the summertime too, when I was real young, my mother or father would put a tub of water out in the sunshine in the yard and let it get warm, and then we would get a bath almost every night, in the summertime. But that was a time when they used an iron pot these large iron pots to wash the clothes in and make soap themselves. And
if you could imagine what the inside of the house where you grew up looked like, how many rooms were there?
There was a kitchen. It had a porch, screened-in porch. There was a kitchen with a wood cook stove. You went through there, and the sitting room, they called it at that time, had a coal stove in it. And then the parlor, what they called the parlor, where the girls used to go with their boyfriends, that was another room. And then we had had a hall and a circular stairway going upstairs, and there was 3 bedrooms upstairs. Yeah.
Did you have to share a bedroom with the older brothers while you were small?
Yes. And now the house is still there, and it's fixed up real nice now, real nice. It's only 4 miles from here that the people have remodeled it, and the yard is all landscaped. It's real nice now.
A whole lot different from what you remember?
Oh yeah, it's a whole lot different.
Was there a secret place in that house that you used to go as a child to just get away from everything?
Well, it ended up when I was in high school that only the youngest girl and I were the only 2 left, and she graduated from high school about, I guess it was 5 years before I did. So she helped me a lot with my high school education. I was pretty good in history and that kind of stuff, but when it got to geometry and trigonometry, I was out of my class. But it was it was a nice family, a nice high moral family.
Did you have any dinners or specific food that your mother used to make that was just out of this world?
Well, she made bread twice a day. Made bread in the morning, made bread in the afternoon for dinner, supper it was in, and I remember carrying lunches to school that had her homemade bread. Well, we didn't even think about bought bread at that time. I've even carried sandwiches to school with me for lunch that all it had between the bread was turnip greens. That sounds silly, but it's the truth. But we just didn't have the money, and a lot of times when they went over our street in the winter, like my father went in the boats and stayed, they would leave about the latter part of October, 1st of November, and they would come home for Christmas, and then they would go back after New Year's and stay for about a month or a month and a half, and then they would come home and start getting everything ready for the crabbing season. And many a time she's given me a dime and sent me to the little store and said, "Get a dime of cheese worth of cheese." People wouldn't believe it now. The youngsters wouldn't believe it now that how the times were at that time.
Which of your half brothers and sisters were you closest to?
My youngest sister, half sister, that was there with me. She was the last one that married and
But not necessarily which one closest in age, but closest tied.
Well, she was. She was the closest. Well, we grew up more together.
What was her name?
Estelle.
And what made you two so close?
Well, she was more my age, and
did you do anything together?
Well,
Special?
we tried to play games, and one Christmas I got a guitar, and we both tried to learn how to play that guitar and sing to it. But there was a man down there that at a little village that could really play a Hawaiian guitar. And we wanted to learn to play like he could, but we never made it. We never made it to that point. Yeah.
Did you ever do too much fishing yourself when you were a kid?
Oh, I did a lot of fishing. Yeah, my mother used to take some heavy pins and bend them and make me fish hooks out of them. Yeah, and a lot of times. In the summer, Dad would send me out. We had a rowboat, and Dad would send me out and say, catch us a mess of fish for supper. And it was plenty of fish that time, right there in the creek. And it wasn't anything good there. Catch a mess of fish for supper. And
did you ever see your mother or father very angry? As a kid?
I only saw my father that I can say angry one time. It was a group of people, and we were all in it, the ones that were still home in the family. I forgot how many it was. But there were several families went up to Ocean City, Maryland on a weekend. And we didn't even know where we were going to sleep. We ended up sleeping in some man's barn with straw. But anyway, we had a real nice white grapevine at our home. And they were full of grapes. And when he come home, somebody had picked all those grapes. And that's the only time I ever saw him actually angry, was when he got home and saw all those were gone. He took the axe and cut the grapevine down. He said, if we can't have those grapes, nobody's going to have those grapes. And that's the only time that I can recall seeing him angry. And I don't think I ever saw him cry, except one time, and that was when I was leaving.
Did you ever know your grandparents?
Oh, I knew my grandmother lived with us, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Your mom's mom or dad?
My dad's mom, yeah. And she had Alzheimer's real bad. And in her latter years, sometime when my father was working at nights and whatnot, my mother would wake me up and say, "Come on, Paul, we got to go find your grandmother. She's walking, and the moon be shining." And a lot of times we just find her out anywhere in the village, just with her night going on, and sometimes not even that. But Mom, she took care of her until she died, and I can remember in the house. I don't know how old I was then, but I can remember in what we called the parlor. That's where she was laid out in the casket. I can recall that.
That was before the war?
Oh, yeah, that was right much before the war, yeah.
When she was alive, were you able ever to have any conversations with her, or was she too far gone?
No, I had conversations with her. She was a teacher in Baltimore, and
what was her name? Just Grandma?
I can't right this minute. I can't.
So tell me about what she told you.
But she would try to teach me the ABCs, but she could say them backwards just as good as anybody could say them forward. And what was her name? I remember when my mother would call me and tell me, "Come on, we got to go find," and she would call her by her name, but I forgot. It's gone. It's gone.
As a kid, what would you characterize your behavior? Were you a good little kid?
I thought so. We didn't, I lived in the age if you had an old tire to pump on to hit on the dirt road and keep it going, that was fun, and you'll see a lot of birdhouses around our house and bird feeders and whatnot, and I'm trying to pay the birds back for when I used to shoot them with a BB gun. Nobody ever told me that was wrong, and so that's one reason why you see a lot.
Were you a good shot?
No. No. I think when I went into service, I weighed about, I think 132. I think was what I weighed.
Tell me about your first memories of school.
Well, when we went to school, the school went from first grade through 11. The same school. You didn't move. I mean, you did. All the classes were in one school, and they had enough that year to have 2 first grades. And I remember that some of the friends I had in the little village were in the other half of the class, and I didn't particularly care for that. But anyway, when we ended up in 1942, there was only 18 left in that class when we graduated, and 3 of them wasn't in the original class in first grade. So, but in first grade, there was kind of a little bit of upper class then, in Parksley that had better clothes and whatnot than we did, and we were kind of downtrodden a little bit.
Do you have a favorite teacher you remember?
In the whole school, you mean? Yeah, she was the roughest one on them, but I guess it was Mrs. Nell Scott. Yeah, and Mrs. Fletcher. Mrs. Nell Scott was a 7th grade teacher before you went in high school. Then your 8th grade was you were in high school, and she prepared us pretty good to go into high school. But I had a lot. Well, I had a lot of. Well, when we got in high school and the war started, we didn't have any men teachers. Besides the principal. The principal was a, and he was also a teacher. But he was a fine gentleman. Mr. Huckstep, C.T. Huckstep was his name.
Did you ever see your teachers discipline students by spanking them?
Oh yeah. Most every one of them had a paddle with holes in it. Yeah. And then one teacher would stick your hand at it, and she'd hit it with a ruler and whatnot. Yeah.
You mentioned before you thought math was your weakest subject.
It was by far.
Was there any time that you had to repeat a class because you didn't do well enough?
We didn't have the algebra or the trigonometry until about the last. The grades were then at 6 weeks reports, and we didn't really have that until about the last 12 weeks of high school. But I didn't. I just couldn't. Some of them got that just like that, but trigonometry was. It carried my math way down for the year, and I was worried about whether I was going to pass that or not for the whole year. But sometimes after that, when I got in the service, I was thinking maybe if I hadn't passed that, and I'd gone back to school, they wouldn't have got me in the Army so quick.
Can you remember the town itself of
Parsley?
Not Parsley, where you were born and grew up in Hopkins?
Oh yeah.
Was there anybody in town that you really trusted, that was an adult but not your family, that you really trusted and talked to a lot? Any adult type of friend?
I had a friend that was about 4 years older than I was. His name was Samuel Spencer Smith. I remember it because all three were S's. And he went into service, and he volunteered in the service. But he was the closest, about the closest friend I had down there. And believe it or not, he was killed in the Bataan Death March in the Philippines. And I have 2 cards from him now, one where he sent me from Hawaii and one where he sent me from the Philippines. I still have them. And he was about the closest friend, I guess, that I had at that time.
As a kid, what was your thing you did? Did you have a niche that you did, a specific hobby?
No. From the time I was probably about 10, 12, I was catching crabs, and at that time we got paid, most time it was 3 cents for a peeler crab that turned to a soft crab, and we would get on the bow of a skiff with a net, not like you see a net now, a long pole net, and go along and catch peeler crabs. And if we try to catch 33 a day to make $1 a day, and it wasn't a whole lot of. There was more girls at my age in this little village than there was boys, than there was. Yeah, there were more girls, and
Did you do much camping as a kid?
No.
Mm-hmm. You stayed at home.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There wasn't any money for anything like that. There wasn't. I tried to. What year was it now? New York World's Fair was. I was trying to save up enough money to go on a train on an excursion train that left from Parksley, but I didn't make it. Yeah.
Did you travel much as a kid, going anywhere?
No. Until I went into service. Except one summer, I did. One of my brother-in-laws was a truck driver carrying produce to the city, so I did ride some with him. Other than that, my father never owned a car, and I guess probably the furthest I'd ever been was probably Salisbury, Maryland, and Cape Charles, until I went in service.
So before you went into service, did you have any girlfriends in high school or in the village?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. We in the late 30s. Or let's see. It was probably around 1940 that a new theater was built in Parksley. It's called Royal Theater, and another one of my brother-in-laws run the projector for the theater, and he got me a job in the wintertime as an usher, and of course I had my uniform and everything, but I got $1 a night. But I never did get to see the end to enter the pictures. It was opening the exit doors or putting the new things on the marquee for the next night or something. But you could pretty well tell in the theater where our class sit. Our high school class sit. There was one region there where our high school class would sit with their date or whatnot, yeah.
How were race relations in the 1930s for you, black people versus white people here?
There were sections in this county where actually a colored person didn't dare go down to some of these sections, but there were other places where the farmers, and now all the farming land on the Eastern Shore is almost corporations. Well, at that time, you worked more as sharecroppers, and it was strawberries in the spring, and white potatoes, and corn, and soybeans. Hadn't been heard tell of it here at that time anyway. And then sweet potatoes. They were the crops that the farmers would plant. And
were most of the black people sharecroppers?
No, most of them that didn't work in the water worked for the sharecroppers. And well, you've seen a different Eastern Shore this morning than what it was then. There was little houses that were where the colored people lived in and whatnot. And
did you have any colored friends?
Yes, I did, but there was none in the little village where I lived. There was none that lived in that village.
Were most of the fishermen white people?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. They would work in the water, like I said. Some of them would what we call haul seine for fish in the summer, but most of it was crabbing in the summer.
Did you ever have a pet as a kid?
I never had a dog, and I don't remember us ever having cats. There was plenty of them in the community, but we never said this is our cat and we own it. No, we didn't. Mm-mm.
Did you do a lot of walking to Parksley from?
Sure did, and Parksley was a town then that if everybody come to town on a Saturday night, not only from our village but from the whole county, and they would do their shopping, and most of them would park on the front street and just walk the streets and talk with their neighbors and whatnot. And then they would, if some of them went to the movies and some of the older ones wanted to sit in the car, they just sit in somebody's car, and you know, it wasn't no cars locked or anything. You just sit there until the person come out of the movie, and they'd say, "Well, I'm ready to go home now, and you're in my car." And so you get out, you know. I mean, the youngsters wouldn't be doing that, but like us, but the older people would do that. There was no problem. It was no problem. But that's another thing about the racial. You never saw a colored person on the street after sunset. It was. You know, it was racially divided, no question.
Was there any places nearby where a white person wouldn't go?
Yes, there's a colored section outside of Parks. It's called Whitesville, which don't go with the story. But yeah, you wouldn't want to go on out there, especially on a Saturday night, because they had their own beer joints and place where you could buy whiskey and whatnot. Not that I ever bought any.
As a kid, did you grow up in a family that had a lot of smokers in it, smoking tobacco?
Yeah, my father was a heavy smoker, and both of my brothers were heavy smokers. I heard one of my brothers curse the day he ever smoked his first cigarette, and he died of lung cancer. And so did my other brother had lung cancer, but he died from a heart attack.
Were you tempted to smoke also?
No, I never smoked.
Why was that? Is there a particular reason why you didn't smoke while everybody else did?
I think it was more my mother than anything else, and she put her foot down on that, and she also, now all the girls graduated from high school, but my two brothers didn't graduate from high school. But she put her foot down and said, "You're not going to smoke, and you're not going to work on the water, and you're going to graduate from high school." So, and I did too. But
was there any time that your dad had to go on relief during the war, or during the Depression?
he worked, for WPA. What was it called? Workman's
Work Progress Administration.
Projects. Yeah, and they had them digging ditches here on the shore, cleaning out drainage ditches. Yes, he did. This firehouse up here was built by the WPA.
Did you have to or choose to work for any of the programs?
Did I personally? No. No.
You were too young.
Yes.
How about your brothers?
Well, my brother closest to me in age, he went into CCC camp at Luray, Virginia, before the war, and he helped worked on Skyline Drive and built that. My older half brother, he worked in the crab business too, down around Cape Charles. Yeah. And
did you ever get on any of the ferries to go to Norfolk or Baltimore?
Oh no, not to Baltimore, but to across the bay we did, of course, to Little Creek and the old Asha Lee and Virginia Lee and Princess Anne and I forgot some of the other ones' names.
Did you know people or relatives across the bay?
Well, during the war, my sister, her husband stopped that truck driving and went to work in the ship factory, shipbuilding over there, and they lived at a little village that was made just for wartime workers. at Ferguson Park. I believe it was in Hampton. Yeah. And
as a kid, was there any time as a child that you got really frightened?
Not really, but a lot of times when I stayed to this what we call the second show, you know, they'd have one at 7 and one at 9, same show, but movie. But when I had to walk home at night, and it was a lot of woods you had to wind through to get home, and a lot of owls in those trees. That was probably the worst frightened I ever was when I was a kid or when I was growing up or whatnot. Yeah.
In the late 1930s, the world situation was boiling over with dictators, and
Yes.
I'm quite sure you know the history.
Yeah.
But if you go back in your memory, in the late 1930s, you're 14, 15 years old. Adolf Hitler is doing his stuff across the sea. The Japs are doing what they're doing. Do you recall hearing about any of that as a kid?
More in school. At that time, I was probably in high school. Well, yeah, in '38, I was in the 8th grade, I guess, in high school. And I know in the library, they would get one copy of the Life magazine and one copy of Look magazine every month. And it was a scramble to see who could get to look at them first. And you had to, there were some in our class that wanted to go in the Navy, and there were some that wanted to go in the Air Force, and they wanted to see what was new, and it was a scramble to get. If you got it on the third day, you were lucky, because we would have an hour of library time every day. But those magazines were really passed around.
Did you know any Jewish people before the war?
Yes. In fact, one of them called us last week from New York. He was visiting his girl, his daughter up in New York. At that time, it had to be around 1940 or probably the latter part of the 30s. They run down what they called fresh air kids out of New York City from the Bronx, and each person or each family was asked if they would take one of them for 2 weeks. And my sister, she was married then, my oldest sister was married and lived right across the road from where I was born. And she agreed, and another lady down at the village, she agreed to take one of the fresh air kids for 2 weeks.
A Jewish kid?
Both of them were Jewish. Now, my the one that wasn't my sister, she took this boy for 1 year, and my sister took the same boy for 2 years.
For vacation, a 2-week time, right?
His name was Eli, and I still hear from him. And up until 15 years ago, I guess, he retired from Kodak out in New York. He lived in Teaneck, New Jersey, but he worked in New York. And he used to come and visit my sister, even up when he was in his 50s and 60s. But when he retired, he moved to Florida, and he and his wife separated. And then my wife and I used to go to Florida in the winters, and he would come over from West Palm Beach to where we were in Florida and visit with us, yes.
In the 1930s, the Jewish people were being rounded up in Germany.
Yeah.
Did you know about that at that time?
I suppose we never. I don't think so. I don't think we did. I don't think we did.
These little Jewish kids coming down from the Bronx, did they bring? They didn't bring any stories about why they were coming?
No, it was. We were told it was just to get them out in the country for a few weeks. You know, yeah. And
did you have a radio at home?
battery. We didn't have any electricity. There was no electricity in this village when I went to go in service, but there was when I come home. But my mother and father had never had it installed. I had it installed after we got home.
With this radio that was on battery, did you listen to any fireside chats of the president?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. And I was listening to a Redskin football game the Sunday that the thing come over the radio that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. I was listening to a battery radio.
Do you remember that specifically?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Was it in the home?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who else was with you?
I don't believe there was anybody with us because at that time we went to church in the afternoon instead of in the morning, and I know that I was home that afternoon by myself when I heard that. Yeah.
What went through your mind?
Well, I'm like a lot of people. I dare say I'd ever heard of Pearl Harbor before. I knew I'd heard of Hawaii, but I dare say I'd ever heard of Pearl Harbor, you know. But I wasn't long finding out what it was.
Compared to the attacks on 9/11 a few years ago versus December 7th, 1941, what was your reaction? How would you compare your reaction to what the terrorists did to us versus what the Japs did to your generation?
Well, the reaction was a lot more tragic to me at Pearl Harbor. Not that I wasn't expecting anything like that. That the Japanese would take us on, to tell you the truth. But at New York, I had no doubts that was going to happen somewhere in this country. I thought it would be in a subway, but it was no doubts in my mind that there was going to be conflict between the Middle East and the United States, and there's going to be more. I'm afraid.
The war in Europe had been raging for a year and a half before Pearl Harbor, and in China,
yes,
it had been raging for nearly 10 years.
That's true.
Do you recall where or what you thought when Hitler invaded Poland and then took over France?
You know, it was just hard to we just didn't get the news. Like I mean, now they'll even show you the battle if you want to see it, like it was in Somalia. But then all the news we got was a Accomac County newspaper paper once a week, and of course that didn't have any foreign news in it.
So you didn't really know what was going on?
You really didn't know what was going on besides what you got from your school. I mean, at the library and whatnot. And Pearl Harbor was more of a shock to me. Especially after I found out how much damage and how many boats and sailors and all had been killed. And but at that time, my friend had been moved from Hawaii to the Philippines. I did know that. Of course, they bombed the Philippines the next day. But
did you know of any Japanese Americans or Japanese or Asian people in the community?
No, no. They had a canning factory down in this village. I don't remember when it was in operations, but I do remember it being there. And they would can tomatoes and potatoes there, and the boats would come in from Baltimore and pick this produce, the canned stuff up and carry it to Baltimore. But I just couldn't visualize. It was so big a tragedy that we could have been so unobserved for that to happen to even at that time.
Did you hear Roosevelt give his war speech December 7th, 1941?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. We heard it in school. We heard it in school, in the auditorium. And a lot of the boys said, well, here we go. It was only 10 of them left, and I had the ones that had started. But anyway, you know, I've always had this feeling, and I might be wrong, but the whole time that before Pearl Harbor, before we got involved in World War II, when Roosevelt was making those speeches to American mothers that we'll never send your child overseas, at the whole time I still think that he and Churchill were getting knew that he was going to get the United States involved in the European War.
Was your family very political? Was your dad involved in politics?
No, but if he was living and President Roosevelt was living, he'd still be voting for him. Yeah, he thought there wasn't any president had ever been like President Roosevelt, FDR.
Was you and your family and your neighborhood really solid Democrats then?
Pretty much so, yes, pretty much so.
The draft had started before Pearl Harbor.
Yes, it had. And my brother that was in the CC camp, his number was the third number pulled out of the fishbowl. Yeah.
Did he have to go?
Oh, yeah.
What was his name?
Fulton. And there's a story I want to tell you about that later on. So remind me in case I forget it.
Well, I want to talk about that now. Is him going into the service before the war?
Yes. Mm-hmm. He went to Fort Leonard Wood. He was in the 8th Infantry Division in the artillery. I believe it was 43rd Artillery Battalion. And I think he come ashore at Omaha Beach. I believe it was D plus 20 something. But he was in Ireland while I was in England.
Tell me how your mother, was it her kid, Fulton?
I know, that was my father's son.
Well, still, she was there for most of it.
Yes.
How did she feel when she found out she was going to lose her stepson to the war, or at least to the Army?
Well, at that time, I think she loved her stepchildren as much as she loved her children. I think my father loved his stepchildren as much as he loved his own. But that time, it was so many going and whatnot, you didn't, seems like at that time, and he'd been away in the CC camps for 3 years or more, and it just didn't seem to me like it was...
too emotionally wrapped up in
No. Mm-mm. No. Mm-mm.
How about your other brother? Did he get called too?
No. No, he at that time he was he was out of the water business. He was working on for the railroad. In fact, he retired from the railroad. He worked on the barges, bringing from Norfolk, Little Creek to Cape Charles.
Before Pearl Harbor, Fulton had gone off into the military. Did he ever come back home in his uniform?
Oh,
before the war?
no, no.
Did you write, or he write you?
Yes.
Did he describe how he felt his military service before the war? How well or good it was to you?
Well, he thought that the CC camp where they lived in barracks and whatnot, he thought that helped him a whole lot when he was taking basic training and whatnot. And I hadn't seen Fulton for about, it had to be close to 5 years. And we were in Spaa, Belgium, and I saw a captain with the 8th Infantry Division patch on. It was an 8 with a golden arrow, blue with a golden arrow went up in the middle of it. And I approached him and I asked him where the 8th Infantry Division was, and he said it's right up at close to Aachen, Germany, in the Hürtgen Forest. And I asked him, I said, well, I got a brother that's in, I knew what the artillery battery, I think it's 43rd Artillery Battalion. And I told him his name, and he took a piece of paper out and wrote it down. I didn't think I'd ever hear anything from it. And about, I don't know, I guess a week had gone by. And they called me down to the OD officer's tent. And I said, well, what do they want with me now? And when I got there, he was there. Fulton was there. They gave us both a 3-day pass, and we went to Brussels. We went to Brussels, Belgium. And I'll get in a minute. In Spaa, that little city was named for their mineral baths. And I'm sure he hadn't had a bath in a month. Dirty. Carried him there and got him cleaned up. And as I remember, they give him some new clothes. And we went, give us a 3-day pass. And we went to Brussels, Belgium. And then I never saw him anymore until he got home before I did. In fact, he was stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and he met his girlfriend, and before I got home, they had married, and they were living down with my mother and father when I come home. They later found a little house, but it didn't work out. They separated like a lot of.
Pretty remarkable. You found your brother overseas.
Yeah. That captain, I didn't think. I thought that wouldn't amount to anything. But
did your brother say that the captain went looking for him? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, and got him the pass to come there. He had a week's pass, and then I got the 3-day pass. We were in a rest area. It was they had those Spaa mineral baths there then, where you went down steps, concrete or steps, and they would be about as big as this room here, and you could wipe the minerals off your arm. I mean, it was a regular health. That was their main thing there, and that's where we were at when the Battle of the Bulge started. We were in Spaa, Belgium.
I want to pause there.
You want a glass of water?
Yeah.
No, I'm
Want some
fine.
water, some
I'm
Coke?
fine. How about you? Would you like something to drink?
I'm okay.
Okay.
In December of 1941, the attack came. You were still in school. You heard the war message
Yeah.
in school. What happened that afternoon after the war message was given to you?
I don't recall that.
You're 17. You're just about the right age.
Yeah, that's right. Because I was 18 in June, that following month, or that, yeah. No, I got
Right,
that
I
wrong.
know.
That was December, but I was going to be 18 the following June, and but I don't recall that anything but what we went on, with our classes and whatnot.
Did you discuss with your friends, hey, let's join, let's go out and kill the Nazis?
Yeah, I know we had discussions during recess and whatever, but it didn't hit home that we were going to be involved. I mean, it didn't hit home that I was going. It was like I was in D-Day. After D-Day, I said to myself many a time, out of the 13 million servicemen, how did I get in this predicament? It was why couldn't I have been a guard or something in the United States? But anyway.
There was no doubt your dad was not going to get drafted.
Oh no, he wasn't going to be drafted. And
Did you think that you wanted to join?
no, not really. I wasn't eager beaver to go into service. I'd never been anywhere, just kind of, a couple kind of. That would have been life. That had been my life, and.
So how did you go into the service then?
I was drafted.
You were drafted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You remember the day that you got the notice in the mail to report?
Well, first off, we got a notice to report to a local doctor, and that was more or less that didn't matter a whole lot. It was a doctor with his own office is all it was, a little building by itself. Dr. DeCarmus was his name. And he was the family doctor for most everybody in this county then.
Were you still in school at the time?
No. I was working at Whispering Pines, motel, and hotel, motel, and restaurant, and I remember I got it and went for that examination, and then we got a call to go to Richmond for the examined, and that was a group thing.
How did you get to Richmond?
We went with a train from here to Cape Charles, took the ferry, crossed the bay, and they had a bus to meet us to across the bay.
Did you go with anybody you knew?
Oh yes, quite a few. Quite a few that I knew. And then we went to Richmond, and if I'm not mistaken, there was I don't know if that's there still there now or not, but there was a hotel there named Murphy Hotel at that time. I'm pretty sure that was what its name was. and they had rooms set aside for us. Apparently, this had been being done from other counties and whatnot. But I tell you, some of the ones that went with us was a rough group. They tore the chandeliers right down out of some of those rooms and threw them down off the 5th floor. Yeah, I was actually more afraid there than I was about going into service. That night, anyway, I was just a youngster, and I had never been used to that. But anyway, we come on back, and it was a local post office down there in a woman's house, in a lady's house down in this village where I live. And I got my call, I think it was probably the 1st of December. But I got that myself from the post office. I always went over and got the mail. I went over to the post office and I got that. And I wasn't going to tell my mother and father till after Christmas. And the storekeeper lived right beside of us. And when he come home one day, he had found out about it. And when he come home one day, he hollered to Mom. He said, "Miss Kate, it's bad. Paul's got his call here just for Christmas, isn't it?" And that let the whole thing out of the bag. And then I think I was sworn in. I think we were all sworn in when we went for our exam. But I don't think we got our call till I think they said, "Now you're going to have Christmas home, but we're going to."
Your enlistment papers say that you enlisted on the 12th of January.
Well, that's when we went then. But I think we were sworn in before that. I think we were sworn in if we passed that examination in Richmond. I'm pretty sure we were, but I think they didn't call us till we went that 13th.
But your parents knew before Christmas.
Yes, they did.
Did they treat you any differently?
No. Well, my mother was more upset than showing that anyway than my father was. Her brother had been in World War One and had been gassed, but he didn't die. I mean, from World War One. But she was more upset than my father was, really. Of course, he already had one boy, in the service. He wasn't overseas or nothing, but he was still in the service.
Had your dad ever gone into the war, World War One?
No. My mother's brother was in World War One.
What was his name? Mother's brother, do you recall?
Harry Shrees. And while I was overseas, he was working in the shipyard during the Second World War, and he actually had a heart attack with his lunchbox going in the shipyard and died. He was working in the shipyard, and he was only in his late 40s.
Had you ever talked to him about his war experience?
No, but at that time in World War II, apparently they had these long pictures taken of a battalion, and they were about that tall and about that long, and he had that over his mantle where he lived down to Hunting Creek. And I would ask him, "Where's your picture at on there?" And he would come and show me and where his picture was. And of course he didn't go to England. He went direct to France, to Le Havre is where he told me that his boat landed. And I don't know how long he was. If I knew, I'm sure I knew, but I have forgotten.
But he never told you how war was for him.
No.
So you were fresh off the stock here, ready to go into enlistment.
Yeah.
Do you recall the Christmas dinner before you went in?
Well, the Christmas dinners were always, everybody come to our house in the family. I mean, even before this, for Thanksgiving or Christmas. And I really don't recall it being any different. I know it's not like a lot of Christmases are now. I mean, when families meet, everybody carries some. At that time, my mother cooked for a week before these dinners like Christmas and Thanksgiving, and but I don't recall. I guess I got more attention, but not a whole lot. Of course, like I say, Fulton was in the service, and
You didn't come back home.
no.
Well, 1943 starts, and you end up heading off for war.
Yeah,
You mentioned you saw your dad cry that day.
yeah.
Was your mother
Right.
holding it together?
Huh?
Was your mother holding it
My
together?
mother didn't. No, she had her crying spell before we left to come to the railroad track, and Dad didn't have a car, and I forgot who brought us out. But to my knowledge, I'm sure in my lifetime that I must have seen him cry, even to his mother's funeral or whatnot. But I think that's the only time that I can remember ever seeing him cry.
You walked or you drove up here to Parksville with
I
somebody?
think somebody brought us to Parksville, to the railroad station. And
How vivid is that day to you when you went off?
it's pretty vivid.
Did you get on a train?
Yeah, and we did the same thing again. We went to Richmond, and from there they had a bus that carried us to Camp Lee. And
Do you remember you seeing your dad out the window as you left?
no, I don't. I think he was around to the end of the depot. But anyway, we went by bus to. I don't know if that was called Camp Lee then or Fort Lee, one or the other. And we went there, and seems I believe they just fed us and bedded us down for the night in a barracks. I think that's what I recall. And the next day, we started with shots and getting our clothes, and they would send your clothes home for you, or it was a place over where you could donate them to the Salvation Army, and I just donated mine to the Salvation Army.
Do you recall the first day of you in service?
Yeah, it was. I guess we probably had some indoctrination, but
Was it shocking or out of the ordinary that makes you remember it?
no. I mean, they didn't start drilling us or anything. Well, we were only. I think I was only there 4 or 5 days to Camp Lee, and we were, and
Did you know anybody else?
there was 4 of us boys, 4 or 5, that when we left the Camp Lee, we went to Atlantic City, New Jersey,
Why did you go to Atlantic City?
for basic training, and it was the Air Force, Army Air Force base. Well, we lived in Hotel Tremore, and all those hotels along that boardwalk were taken over by the Air Force, but this won't surprise you. But every 4th day, while we were eating lunch, they had the indoor swimming pools there, changed to mess halls. Y'all no water in them, of course. But about every 4th day there, Glenn Miller's orchestra would play for us. See, he was in the Air Force, and we'd hear him about every fourth day. But anyway, it was cold, and we'd have to march out on that boardwalk to this field, and that was about, I guess 4 or 5 miles. And sometimes they taught us that old "Off we go into the wild blue yonder," singing. And some days the boys didn't want to sing, and this staff sergeant that was training us, he would say, "Well, now you're either going to sing or you're not going to walk on this boardwalk. You're going to walk right there in that sand, and harder walking." And that's what he would do. If they wouldn't sing that song, he would march us out in the surf, not in the surf, but in this field. But some of them, I never had that happen to me, but some of them did march them out in this surf. But anyway, we would go out there to that field, and we were learning drilling and whatnot, and we were glad every day we would have gas mask drill. You had to go through this block house where they had gas in it, mustard gas, and we were glad to see that come so we could get our face warm, to get that gas mask on, and get. It was a bitter cold winter up there.
Did you have a choice to go in the Air Force?
Did what?
Did they give you a choice to go into the Army Air Corps?
Well, when we were there, no, they just sent us there. But while we were there, we took a lot of tests and whatnot, and they give us a test, numerous tests, but one of them was comparing radio Morse code. They would send two Morse code signals, like that for S and da 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 for O, and you had a paper there where you marked it whether you thought they were both alike or whether they were different. And so when they told me that I had done well on that test, I still didn't know where I was going or whatnot. But after we learned close order drill and everything there, I forgot how many weeks we stayed there. But at what's the place there called? The convention center, the huge place, our convention center. They marched us all down to there, and that hotel. Now we didn't have the use of the elevator. You had to march up and down. You had to go up and down the stairs. And some days when it was real cold and you had these overcoats on and all these equipment and everything, gas mask and everything, by the time that you got down from the 5th or 8th floor, you were wringing wet with sweat. And then you had to go out in this cold. And what was that other? They had one of the hotels that was for the hospital there. I forgot what the name of that hotel was. I know it's not there now. But anyway, it was a lot of pneumonia and flu in that place. I never had it, but one morning they marched us down to this to the convention center where they always had the basketball games. It was huge, and they'd put up these little stands, like little grandstands that would hold, I guess, 150 people, and they had each one of them numbered. It must have been 30 of them in there, and as they called your name, they would tell you which stand to go to. And I said, well, I know one of these other boys is going to come to stand too, but it didn't. And one of them landed ended up in the Alaska, Kiska, and up there, one of them that I thought maybe would go with me. But after that, and the next day or the day after that, they put the group of us on a train.
And this time you didn't know anybody. Is that
No, no. And we went to Kansas City.
Now, that's halfway across the country.
Yeah.
How was that train trip?
That was all right. That was good. And we went to. I got a picture of the school in there and the hotel where we stayed in. We stayed there. I think it was 20 weeks, and we lived in the Hotel Commonwealth. And of course, I had never bowled before, and right beside that Commonwealth Hotel was a bowling alley, Palace Bowling Alley, and that's where I learned to bowl. And actually, a girl taught me. I still remember her name. It was Ellen Howry, and she was from Newton, Kansas, and she was working in the airplane parts factory there. Now these girls were billeted in a home, and they had house mothers, and they had to be in that home by a certain hour each. Well, I don't think they got out during the week, but on like Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, they had to be in that home. They were out, but during the week they had to be in that home at a certain hour. But anyway, we went to school there. I think it was 20 weeks.
And what was the school for?
Morse code, and typing and Morse code, and they would sit us down to some long tables, and we had earphones, and they would send a Morse code over those earphones, and sometimes there would be an instructor on there, and he would say, now, what is like da 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 da? Well, that to us meant J. And by the way, our call letters when we were in England and France and Germany and Belgium was JASQ, Jiggy is the Sugar Queen. I'll never forget that. And but anyway, when and they had a real huge, tall building in Kansas City, and they had a radios operator right up in the top of that. And this was kind of during the latter part of the instructions after we learned Morse code. But before that, there was college graduates in there that couldn't learn Morse code. And a lot of them were sent to Fort Leonard Wood. A lot of them that I knew were sent to Fort Leonard Wood. They were washed out of there. But after we learned Morse code.
And were you still in the Air Force at this time?
Yeah, that was Air Force. And if you didn't increase in your speed 2 words a minute, probably the last 10 weeks we were there, you were sent out. You had to increase sending and receiving at least 2 words a minute. Well, I didn't have any trouble with that. But then they put us in a blinker, like Navy thing. Now, I did have trouble with that. On our final exams, the instructor, well, he was a captain, really, and he told me, he said, listen to my key, and you don't have to hear the Morse code just by my key, and you can pass this. So he wanted me to pass. He said, you're never going to need this blinker code. Where you're going, you're never going to need it. So anyway, I passed it, and then from there, we went to where shows on there, Camp Pinedale, but we didn't go there. There was a Camp Pinedale right close to Hammer Field, and we went to Hammer Field, and that was the home of the B-25s and B-26s at that time. And we were training there for to either be a radio gunner in B-25s or B-26s, and then we still went to this Marsh code thing, which was right across the road, was this Camp Pinedale. That was a part of what was this service called? Anyway, when we left there, we went to Marchfield, which was a huge field there.
In California?
In California. It was right outside of Riverside, if I remember correctly. And we took more we were taking more training there. Well, in the meantime, they had classes in Kansas City. Your class was numbered, and it was about 45 in it, I guess. Well, we all went together to Hammer Field, and by that time we had learned. Had good friends and whatnot. A lot of us played ball, and we went out to Scope Field, and we had a softball team in a league there and everything. When we got to Marchfield and we're getting more training, one day we went out and looked on the bulletin board, and it said, I believe it was 8 of us, to have our bags packed by such an hour the next day that we were being transferred. And when we ended up, they sent us right back to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey.
So you had a nice little trip across the country.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, I did get a furlough after I passed the radio thing in Hammer Field. I got a furlough, 15 days, and it took me 5.5 to get home, 5.5 to get back. And some of those trains, good gosh, they didn't even have water in the coaches. They had taken retired coaches off of where they had, and you could thump them seats and dust would come up about that high. No restroom. Only thing it was a hole in where the bathroom was supposed to be. And when we got to Kansas, when I got to Chicago, they had a veteran or a soldiers and sailors place in the basement there where you can get a shower and a shave and everything. So I went down there, and when I looked in the mirror, I couldn't believe it was me. I just couldn't believe it was me. All I could see was my eyes. The rest of me was nothing but dirt. So I got down there and took a shower and found out when I could get a train to Hampton Roads. And I put you could see soldiers and sailors laying everywhere, and they'd have a sign on them, "Wake me up at such and such a time." And so I lay down on one of them benches and put a sign on it, "Wake me up." Somebody woke me up, and I got on the train, and I thought that was the slowest thing. Every little pig path like here in Ohio, that train would stop. Thank you. I finally got to Hampton Roads and got on the ferry coming home. And would you believe that ferry run into a submarine net out there, and we had to stay out there all night long. and they come up there the next day with divers and got us free. I finally got to Parksley and got home to the village. When I got home, my mother and father were over to Newport News visiting her daughter and my father's stepdaughter. I got on the phone and called there, and they said we'll be right there as soon as we can get there. Well, I knew that was going to be so. Well, I went up and got in my bed. There wasn't nobody else there. I went up and got in my bed, and I didn't wake up until they got home over from Newport News, and they woke me up. But anyway, after that furlough, when I went back to Hammerfield was when we got transferred to Marchfield, and then back to Camp Kilmer. And they wouldn't let us have we were to Camp Kilmer about 2 weeks, but they wouldn't let us have a weekend pass to come home. They just wouldn't let us do it.
You said you got transferred. Is that the time you got transferred out of the Air Force?
As far as we knew, we were still in the Air Force, and we stayed at Camp Kilmer, and they even regimented us as to what seat to get in on the train to go to where the ferry was, and we had about 2 weeks there, and everybody was uptight then and whatnot, and 2 or 3 times they told us we were going the next day, and then we wouldn't go and whatnot, and finally the day come for us to go, or they told us, and we went. And I'll never forget, as we were marching up on that to get on that boat, it was an Italian, but I had known him since Kansas City. His name was Joe Palazzo, and there was another one that was named John Sarangelo. They were both Italian. One was in front of me, and one of them was in back of me, and the band was playing. I remember what that band was playing every day, almost. But anyway, the one in front of me said, "Well, boys, this looks like this is the real thing." And the one in back of me said, "Don't jump to conclusions." And there we were going up the gangplank, getting on the boat. What he meant was we had been indoctrinated so much. Is this the real thing or not? But it was. And we went over on a Athlone Castle. It was an English boat, English crew. They told us that had been a mail boat from England to Africa during the war. And I have seen since then where there was a company name, the last name was Castle. Since the war, since I've come home. But anyway, we were, I believe it was 13 days going to Glasgow, Scotland. We went up by Iceland, within sight of Iceland, and all the destroyers took turns and went in and refueled. And then we went on to Glasgow, Scotland. And
now, you've been on water before, so you never got seasick.
Yes, I did too. Yes, I did. I got seasick. I was just as seasick. The first day out of New York Harbor, that was just as pretty. Yeah. But that second night, we run into a storm, and I really was sick. And this was an English boat, and my best buddy was named Roy Mumm. He was from Urbana, Illinois. And I stayed sick the whole time we were going to England. In fact, I was seasick in the barracks for 3 days after we got there. Those barracks were going back. The only thing he could find me to eat was buy from the Englishman was Hershey chocolate bars and oranges. And I would get where I could smell that food, and back I'd have to retreat. I'd have to go back. Well, like I say, when I got to England, when we finally got in the barracks, that barracks walls were going back and forth. But we only heard the destroyers throwing over, what do you call those canisters?
Depth charges?
Depth, yeah. We heard them one time throwing out those depth charges. And we landed in Glasgow.
So you weren't really under submarine attack that you could tell?
Not that we knew of. If there was either boat sunk in that convoy. Of course, it was a huge convoy. I'm sure some of them boats, I'm sure they were stretched out for 30, 40 miles. And when we got to Glasgow, they put us on a train, and we ended up at Birmingham. It's Birmingham, England, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Birmingham is where we ended up, and we stayed there about a week. And one day, all 8 of our names together were, I don't know if it was 8 or 12 of us. It could have been 12. We're on there to be ready for the go at a certain time. And we were ready, and this, I believe he was a tech sergeant that met us. And we were eager to find out where we were going. And he said, well, I can't tell you where you're going, but I can tell you one thing. You're all going to the same field. Well, we thought, well, this is still good, you know. So we went, I don't know, from, I guess, 15 miles or so. It was down close to Bristol. And we come to this sign. We saw the camp before we saw the sign. Where we went in that camp, it had a great big sign up there. Welcome to the Big Red One. That was the 1st Infantry Division. That's when we knew that we were in the Infantry Division, or something was needing us in the infantry, radio operators.
So you weren't in the Air Force anymore when you saw that sign?
Nobody ever told us that. Nobody ever told me that. But they sent, apparently the word went to California, send us radio operators. And we were sent. And the rest of our class that was in Marchfield went to the Pacific. But us 12, we went to England.
Besides working as a Morse code operator, did you know how to repair the equipment too?
No, they had a specialist for that. The radio that we used going ashore D-Day was a British paratroopers radio, and it was we had a receiver, and we had a
transmitter.
Yeah, transmitter, and it was operated by batteries, and then we had a long antenna with that. But from there, we went to a little town named Clevedon. It was not very far from Bristol, and that's where the First Army headquarters was, and it was a small town. And
were you billeted in the town?
This was they called it a beach, but it wasn't anything but cobblestones, and it had a boardwalk all the way around it. It was a graveled boardwalk, and it had been a resort town, and it had 3-story houses all along that waterfront. I got pictures of that in there, and when we first got there, the British had evacuated that for us. I mean, this British soldiers has been there before us. And the first couple of weeks we were there, you wouldn't see anybody on the street at all or anything, you know. Apparently the British soldiers had told them a lot of stories about American troops. And but anyway, after about a couple of weeks, we started a little bit more with fraternation, and and then the word got out that we could draw rations on the weekend and go to these people's houses for dinner. Of course, all they had was fish and chips. That's truth. That's all they ate. And you could buy them, but they didn't even have the paper to put them in. They put them on newspaper. But anyway, we were in this little town, and what was I talking about?
Yeah,
Nation. Pretty soon, on the bulletin board, it would be that this Mr. So and so requests this many soldiers for dinner on so and so. We carried a fruit cocktail and canned peaches and that kind of stuff. They'd never seen it before. They'd never heard tell of it. And they had nothing like ice or nothing. If you went in one of the beer places, you didn't get nothing but hot, warm beer. I mean, I didn't drink, but that's what they all got. There was no ice. There wasn't just no ice there. And like a drink, they'd never heard of it. Hot tea was their thing, and beer, warm beer. But anyway, so after about a week or so, we got like these invitations, and the bulletin board would be full of them. And it was one man that had a little tea shop down on that boardwalk. And if you carried him a can of condensed milk, he thought that was the greatest thing that he'd ever heard of. That we still had those kind of things. And if you could sneak some eggs out of the quartermaster's place, you were really a big shot. But I tell you, see, they had been in war about 4 years, and they were hurting.
Did you get a commanding officer then when you came into the headquarters?
Our officer was Lieutenant Donald E. Kaiser. And believe it or not, he had been in the Pacific when World War started as a PFC. And he was sent back to the States to, what'd you call it, officers...
candidate school?
Yeah, candidate school. And he come over to England as a lieutenant. And on weekends, he would borrow one of the men's sergeants or what's the jacket to go out with some of us. Yeah, he said, now, tomorrow morning, if this was Friday, tomorrow morning inspection, you all better be spick-spat, but I'm going out with you tonight. And he would. He had been, he was from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he had played football for Michigan State. And he was a good person, a good Joe. But anyway, he was our officer there, and it got so that where you would go to these families, and I was invited out one time, or several times, but this one family that had a daughter. She was the same age I was, or within a few months, and she was a clerk in the gas company in that town, and she was getting £1 and 10 shillings a week for working. That was $5 was what she was making. And we got to be good friends. And after D-Day, when my birthday was June 16th, she sent me a New Testament with a zipper all the way around it. I still have it for my birthday. And her name was Joan Planett. It wasn't called Planet, but that was how you spelt it. And after D-Day, I never did. I went back to that little village after D-Day, after the war was over.
Did you find her?
No, her father had died. He run a little bakery there in that town, and if he knew I was had the night off and we were going to the movie there in town or something, he would save whatever he had left over from that day's cooking for me to carry back to the boys back to the where we were billeted. And it got so that town, by the time we left there, that town, most of that town knew us by name.
So you stayed there from pretty much the time you got to England to time you ship out.
Well, not till D-Day. It don't say it in one of those things there where a write-up is, but they sent us from Clevedon down to it was outside of Weymouth, and that was the port we left from, was Weymouth, where the 1st Division lived from. And we were in a compound there. I know it had to be for a month before D-Day, and we couldn't write or we couldn't receive mail. And that's where we got not tangled up. That's where we learned that we were going ashore with this British paratroopers radio. And we practiced with that for about that month.
Did you have another radio that you were, was it like a 2 radio set that you were communicating with?
Oh yeah, well that JASQ stations, we had JSQ was the main station, JSQ 1, JSQ 2, and JSQ 3. Now the JSQ 1 was for the 1st Army, and JAS 2 was for let me see, that was for the what was it went ashore on Utah? That was
for the 1st Army 4th Division.
Yeah. No, that wasn't it though. One of them was for the fake army that they made up for
Patton.
Yeah, for Patton, and the other one was for
the 3rd Army.
For the 3rd Army that didn't go ashore on D-Day. Yeah, for the 3rd Army, and for the one that made up for Patton, and then I guess, like I say, we stayed there about a month.
And you couldn't communicate with anybody?
No, you couldn't send there was MPs everywhere. You couldn't, once you got in that compound, you were in there.
How much did you train for the invasion?
Well, we each one had a Sub-Thompson 45 machine gun, and we had that training at, let me see now.
Back in the States?
Yeah, oh yeah. We did some out there over in England too. But I remember with that 45 Thompson machine gun, they always, they had silhouettes, of course, but they would tell you to, if you were going to shoot somebody with that machine gun, start to the lower left, because that machine gun was going to go up to your right, no matter how you handle it. And and we let me see, we had rifle at Hammerfield. We had a rifle range there, and we also spent 2 nights. 2 weeks out in the desert there in San Joaquin Valley. Hot? Oh, it was hot. And that night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, you would wake up frozen. And we would have to fall out about 5 o'clock and still be dark, and everybody wrap a blanket around them. And it looked like a bunch of Indians out there for roll call. But yeah, we had calisthenics to everywhere we went, and we also had bayonet practice, and all that went with it.
How about amphibious landing practice? Were you at Slapton Sands?
No, never went there. We didn't have any training as far as getting off of that LST onto that LCVP. We didn't have any training, no. And
well, you left Weymouth on the day before D-Day.
yeah, but we had been on the boat for 4 days.
4 days.
And that diesel, everybody hadn't, or most everybody hadn't been used to that diesel fuel. That made a lot of them sick. It was, they never stopped the motors of those boats, and it was all diesel fuel, and a lot of them, before we ever left Weymouth, were sick from that diesel fuel.
Did it affect you since you've been around the boat?
Yeah, because I had never been around any diesel fuel before. Didn't know what it was until we got there. And
how cramped was the LST you were on?
We all had single bunks on that LST, but nobody went to sleep. Hardly ever went to sleep. It was almost so much noise. There's LSTs lined up all along the harbor and filling up with tanks and everything else.
You recall the name or the number of the LST that you were on?
It's on that paper there.
Okay.
And so we stayed on the boats for. We had one night that we were supposed to go, and they canceled that. But we had been on the boats 2 or 3 days prior to that.
Had you been given some type of orders on what your job was to be on D-Day?
To get try to get the first signals from Omaha Beach back to London. Is what they were.
What were you supposed to tell them? Just to establish contact?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then we were supposed to send the first war correspondence. But the armies come first. Was known. The orders were to take care of the army communication first, and let the war correspondents do what they could. Well, later on, as it went on, when we got after on D-Day +1, when we finally got communications, well, the war correspondents were about to go crazy. They wanted to send her, and they come find out they didn't have any sensors there, so nobody could send her their on D-Day +1. Nobody could send their correspondence to their papers, and they had some kind of a radio outfit in England that took our Morse coded messages, and then they could put that on tape and send that so fast that you couldn't even hear Morse code. It was just a buzz once that got to England, back to New York or wherever, Chicago, wherever they wanted to send it. And
when did they tell you were supposed to do that? Was that before you got on the LST?
When we were training with the paratroopers, radios there while we were in that compound. That's where we first met Captain Hughes and Lieutenant Brightman. We had never seen them before we got in that compound.
Were they British paratroopers?
No, they were American.
American?
Yeah.
You mentioned the British paratrooper radio. It was just a radio. It wasn't the paratroopers you were working with, was it?
It was what the British paratroopers used when they jumped.
Right.
Like in, what was the thing called where Montgomery made a mess of?
At
Flower Garden or something up into Holland and whatnot. And, but those things were heavy, especially ones that had the batteries in it. And
you're on this LST, and they finally leave harbor.
yeah,
I'm told it's rough seas.
it was real rough. Let me tell you, I was so seasick. They sent me to the medical doctor on that LST to see if I had my appendix were burst. I went ashore seasick, and most of them did go shore seasick.
You got off the LST and got onto an LCVP.
Yeah, and we went down to nets on the side.
And that's the first time you ever done that?
First time I ever did it. The only time I ever did. And we had to get some help for them because we had no ropes. And they had to bring them down to that LCVP by rope. And we guided them, but we had them waterproofed. The Army chests. They were in those Army chests. And we had them waterproofed. And then we had the life preservers on them where you crack that capsule, and that's what we had on too. And we also had on gas impregnated clothing in case they used gas, and that was stiff as I don't know what. And especially when we got overboard, we were over our heads really.
When you rode the LCVP in to the beach,
yeah.
What wave were you?
I think we were in the second wave. In that thing there, it says that we loaded those the radio chests at 9 o'clock, but that wasn't right. It was dark when we loaded those.
So it was still in the morning.
It was. Oh yeah, it was still morning, and we were in the first wave. But what they did, these LCVPs circled. It must have been, I don't know, hundreds of them, and they circled until it come your time to go in, and that's when you went in.
Was it light out when you finally headed toward shore?
It was probably breaking light when we went ashore.
Were you able to see over the gunwales and see the other boats?
Well, they told you not to, because the Germans was shelling the boats as they come in. I mean, I saw boats hit shells, mortars, not mortars, 88s hit boats and sink them. Yeah. And
they were in front of you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And none of the. I think there was 4 tanks that day. The British had a way that they were supposed to float them in and whatnot. I think there was only 4 out of the ones that were supposed to get to Omaha Beach that got there. In that group, I think it was only 4.
What type of equipment was on your LST? Besides your 8-man
had a
group.
coxswain, they called them, either Coast Guard or Navy. You said Elliot.
On your LST.
What was in the question now?
Did you have tanks and trucks on your LST also?
No, we were all. It was all personnel.
And when you went in on the LCVP, how many people were in your team?
Well, there was only the 4 of us that was in my team. They put all of us to the back of the boat, and there was approximately, I'd say, 35 to 40 infantrymen in front of us. That when the ramp went down, they all went over before we got out, because we had to bring those chests out. Just the 4 of us. None of them helped us. I mean, they were gone, what was alive. when that boat ramp went down.
Before we go any further, I need to change tapes.
Mm-hmm. Where were we?
You were just about to get off.
You were circling in the water waiting.
Oh, okay.
Now, I want you to tell me about the 4 guys. You being one,
Yes.
and who are the other 3?
Bob Dow.
Tell me about him.
Bob Dow Jr. He lived in Norway, Maine, was where he was from. His wife was named Barbara, and he called her Barbs. And after D-Day was over and everything, I asked our lieutenant, I said, why did you pick us? Well, they picked 4 operators, because 2 of them were going to go to Utah. It was 4 go to Utah Beach, too. But their boats had motor trouble, and they didn't get ashore D-Day. But anyway, I said, why did you pick Dow and me to go to D-Day? He said, well, every time when we wasn't training, you and Dow were out there either playing ball, some kind of ball or something. You were the most athletic ones, 2 of the most athletic radio operators we had. Well, I didn't buy that too much, but we were out there always kicking a football or passing a football or something in England if it ever stopped raining. But anyway, when Bob Dow, on the 50th day anniversary of D-Day, I hadn't had any contact with Bob Dow, I know, for 40-some years. And my wife Lola was going to a church meeting that night. And I said, while you're gone, I'm going to see if I can get in touch with Bob Dow, see if he's still living. So I called, after she left, I called the information, and I got this operator, and she was very nice. She said, I'm going to switch you to an operator in Maine. And she did. I told the operator in Maine, I said, I had a buddy that went ashore with me 50 years ago on D-Day, and I said, I'm trying to see if he's still alive or whatnot. She said, well, what was his name? I said, it was Robert E. Dow, Jr. She said, well, wait just a minute. I told her what my name was, Mr. Lewis. She said, wait just a minute. She said, I've got 2 phone numbers for him. I've got his office and I've got his home. This was about 9 o'clock at night. She said, now, where do you want me to ring? I said, well, ring his house, 'cause, more than likely. So she did, and this man answered. I said, I'm looking for Bob Dow that I went ashore with D-Day. He said, well, Louis, you found him. That's very word. He said, Louis, you found him. And we had a long conversation. And I was asking about his wife and everything. Well, he said, Louis, my wife passed away. And he said, I remarried, and my second wife passed away. And he said, but my brother and I, after the war was over, we went to college, and we have a law firm here in Norway, Maine. And he said, we're getting ready to turn that over to our sons. They are also lawyers. And he said, my brother and I are going to Florida in October. He said he lost his wife too. He said, we're going to Florida in October, and I want you to tell me how to get where you live. So I told him, and we were sitting here one day in October, and this motorhome drove up out in front of the house, and it was him and his brother. And we sit here and talk and talk and talk and talk. And he said, do you remember on Omaha Beach when we were jumping from shell hole to shell hole, and I was in the front shell hole, and I motioned you to come on, and he said, you'd no more had jumped in that shell hole than one hit right in the hole where you had left. So I said, I don't know whether I remember that or not, Bob, but I said, I know it was hot there for a good long time. But anyway, that was the one. Now the other two, the lieutenant and the captain, we had never seen them until we went in the compound, and they didn't know anything about radio. I mean, they didn't know any Morse code or radio or anything. I really don't know why they were sent ashore with us, unless they thought we would try to swim back to England, I guess. And after about D-Day plus 2 or 3, I guess, I never saw either one of them before. Again.
Who carried the big chests with the radio in it?
Well, see, we were trying to float them, and when we got overboard with them, well, when I went overboard, I was over my head. Of course, I'd been used to the water. A lot of soldiers there just drowned because they had so much equipment on them. They turned them upside down; they couldn't get back. When we got those chests off, they had left a rope on them, thank goodness, off the LST, and we pulled them off, and it was rough. The water was rough, and we started trying to get ashore with them, and we got almost there, and Captain Hughes said, let them go, no way are we going to live to get off here, and trying to get them radio on the beach. So that's what we did. And he said, now just do the best you can. Try to get up there underneath that cliff, underneath that. It was the beach, and then went up, and then leveled off again. And there was a German pillbox right where we went ashore, but by the time we got there, it had been knocked out. And we finally got up there underneath that cliff, crawling and jumping a little bit at a time with our elbows and knees and whatnot. And till today, I can't tell you how the lieutenant and the captain got there, but I know how Dal and I got there. And we got underneath of that beach. And that's as far as anybody had gone. Nobody had gone over that cliff or whatnot. And it was... the worst part of the D-Day for me was when we were there looking back out to the ones coming ashore, because they were just zeroed in on them, and they would open that door, and 2 out of every 3 boats would be hit with a mortar shell or a 88 shell by the time they got out. And it's not nice to talk about, but we just watched boys being blown 30 feet in the air,
Were the machine guns firing too?
Oh, the machine guns were firing, but thank the Lord we only saw 2 German airplanes come over that day.
You saw those too?
We saw those 2 come over that day. Now that night some come over. But I don't know where, to this day, I don't know where Captain Hughes or Lieutenant Brightman got to. But
we see the movies on TV that these soldiers go charging across the beach. Is that what it looked like?
Well, the ones that got up and made it after those mortars and all were hitting, it was a terrible, terrible sight. And I guess the ones that were there that were watching when we went was too. But it got to be about 11 o'clock or so.
And you still had your machine gun, just didn't have the radio.
Yeah. About 11 o'clock or so, it was 2 or 3 boats. We could see that they went to get in line, and they started coming along the beach there, real slow like, and they wasn't too far out. And when they started their guns going, I thought each one of them was blowing up. I had never seen fire from a cruiser or a destroyer or a battleship. And they went along there real slow. And they never stopped firing. I mean, it was continuous firing until they must have been 3 miles away from us. Just nothing but fire coming from those boats. And I can tell you that's when the shelling stopped. I mean, most of it. That's when they could get up and go. But if it hadn't been for those boats, the Air Force missed that beach by 8 miles, 7 or 8 miles.
You had been on the bluff.
Yeah,
under the bluff for how many hours before those boats came along?
At least 3.
And all during that time, the whole beach was being pelted by artillery.
Yeah, and the ones that made it to the cliff, the place was crowded with them. I mean, the ones that were alive.
Were they all from the 1st Division?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That you could tell?
Where we were, yeah. They were all first. 29th went, 29th or 2nd? 29th went ashore to the right of us.
But that was too far to see. You didn't see that.
Yeah, we didn't see that.
When you saw the LCVPs coming in during that 3 hours, were they coming in 1 at a time or 12 at a time, or how thick?
When it first started, there was one line that would come in, but as it got later, there would be 3 or 4 different lines coming in at one time. Yeah.
Did you see beach obstacles?
Oh yeah, those tripe things. Yeah. The tide had come up some when we went in. Of course, they wanted to go. The thing was to go to shore at that low tide, so you could see where those were with mines on them and whatnot. But the engineers, they took a terrible beating because they went ahead first. I mean, they were the first ones that went. Of course, the Rangers were just where that point Du Hart was. That wasn't very far from where we were at. Just
what was your closest call that you recall having there on D-Day?
On D-Day,
to Bayern.
Was getting off of the boat, getting to the over the beach, getting over the beach. That was the closest call we had, because you could hear bullets just hitting that LCVP before it ever put slit. It's a ramp day.
You said you went over the edge. Did you go off the front of the LCVP or off the side of the LCVP?
Off the side of the ramp was where I went off. Yeah, and we had those. Like I say, we had those. Trunks. They're big. They're big. Those army trunks, or they were.
Did you go and retrieve those trunks?
That's a report that's in there. It says in there about midday that they sent me up the cliff. There were some tanks coming in then to see if I saw those trunks that there were. Of course, I was the low ranking when Dow was a sergeant, and that was when I met my first German.
You went up the bluff.
Up the bluff. As I was crawling up there, this German was his whole stomach had been cut out, and he was holding his stomach with his hands and begging somebody to shoot him. He was holding his stomach with his left hand and begging somebody to shoot him, but I didn't, and I don't know.
You just passing by?
I was crawling, trying to get. Now he was so wounded he he couldn't harm anybody. I didn't even see a weapon that he had. I guess he'd been in that pillbox or something.
So you just kept going up the bluff.
Yeah, I kept on up the bluff, and I really can't say I remember this, but it says in that report that I saw one of those chests on a tank, and I got them to take the chest off of the tank, and then later on they supposedly went down and found the other chest on the beach, and then we lost our antenna. We had that in a canvas bag. It was long as this room is, and then it telescoped up too, and we lost that. More than likely sunk, and so later on that day, it was getting pretty well in the afternoon. We set up there just off of the beach with a radio and tried to use an antenna off of a burnout Jeep. And they said they heard us in England calling them, but we couldn't hear them answering us. And then the next day we went, the captain and the lieutenant, was it 7th Corps or 4th Corps had come ashore, and we went over and started operating with one of their radios.
How about the nighttime?
That night, you ain't gonna believe this either. That night, we Dal and I, we found a German slit trench where they had dug, and we got in that thing, and then we decided, we don't know whether this thing is booby-trapped or not. So we got out and dug a foxhole. We had, shovels on our belt. There wasn't much count, but they were shovels. But anyway, we got out and dug us a foxhole. In the meantime, this artillery battalion had set up a whole slew of artillery to the left of us. Well, that night, it looked like every fifth shell was supposed to be every fifth bullet was supposed to be a tracer. It didn't look like you could put your hand up without being hit with a tracer, and there was 4 other bullets besides that. And that artillery, when that opened up, I never heard. They all must have opened. They all must have fired at the same time, but I never heard anything that loud. Well, do you know, they shot just about all night long. And old Dow, I would have to punch him in the ribs. He would be laying there snoring. Sleep. That don't sound reasonable. But when we were in England, and Bristol would get an air raid down in the basement. And when we come up, old Dow would be there, where have you all been? He wouldn't even go down in the basement for an air raid. But anyway, I know that sounds like a fairy tale, but that's the truth. He actually snored that night with all that artillery going on. And the next day, of course, we were still receiving shells and whatnot, but the next day was a lot quieter. And I don't know where the captain and lieutenant went to, but Dal and I decided we were hungry, and we went back down to the beach, and we found some canned stuff floating. And this sounds like a story too, but I got the label right in there. We found some beans, and the can was labeled from a factory that's only about 20 miles from here. I got it right in there. The factory's gone now, but it was down at Machapunga, if you saw that sign coming up here. And then we did most of to V Corps, or I think it was 4th Corps or 7th Corps. They had what they call 399 radios, SCR, just 99, and they towed a large generator in back of them, and that was enclosed in a truck. And from then on, to the best of my knowledge, that's all we used in radio operating for the rest of the war. It had two where two could be operating at the same time in it, and that's my tale of D-Day, I guess.
You didn't shoot your submachine gun at all?
No.
At that time?
No. The only time I shot was in Battle of the Bulge.
How long did the build-up take, and where did you set up your operation?
The Corps, which I can't remember what, that was maybe a half a mile off. It wasn't far from Maria Leige,
St. Mary Leige.
St. Mary's Leige. See, on that map in there, that shows Colville looks like it's a good ways from the beach. That was almost right off the beach,
A couple hundred yards?
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit more than that, but not too far from the beach. And this Corps was set up. It was somewhere close to Colville or one of the St. Marie.
That would be Colville or Bearville, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where you set your operation up at headquarters.
Yeah. Now our regular outfit that we had in England, that didn't come ashore. I believe it was D+12.
So you were there for 12 days before your outfit really showed up.
And I got a picture of Lieutenant Kaiser with his Jeep driver. He was a little Italian too, named Lefebvre or something like that. I got a picture of when he come and picked us up in a Jeep to come back and get with the outfit.
Were you supposed to find your food for yourself during that entire time?
To do what now?
Were you supposed to find your own food during that time? And
well, by that time they had K rations distributed, plenty of them on the beach. But the war was almost over before we got anything in a can, But from there, we
now you were on the front line at Normandy during that time.
Yes, we were.
When the attack happened at St. Lo, where was your outfit?
We were right behind the front lines. I saw the officer from Richmond's casket with the American flag on it at St. Lo, where he said he was going to be the first one in St. Lo. And he was, but he died. And we went through St. Lo. And
but the fighting had ended by the time you went into town. Is that right?
It was still some artillery fire going on. It wasn't hand to hand.
How many other Germans did you see in Normandy besides the one that you saw there on D-Day?
I saw a lot of prisoners being marched to the beach. And a lot of dead ones. There was dead ones in that pillbox right where we got off the beach. Where it had been knocked out.
But no armed ones that were shooting at you. You didn't see any Germans who were shooting at you.
No. It was mostly artillery at that time. And of course, we stayed in that beachhead until sometime in July.
Did any of the French in the region talk to you or communicate with you?
Yeah. I could. They give us books while we were in that compound, what compared to what in French and English, and they also give us them for German, a book which for German too, that compared like hello with I forgot now what her French was, but bonjour or whatever, and if we couldn't talk to them, we'd show them the book, you know, and oh yeah, they wanted, they sure wanted us to drink a lot of wine. They offered wine, yeah, or cognac or something other.
Did your headquarters area ever come under artillery attack or bombing attack? In Normandy?
Not in Normandy, no. Mm-mm. No, not that I can recall.
When you were given dispatches of sent, did you know what you were sending, or was it just in code?
Not for the Army, no. They had code clerks that made up the message. They sent an Army message. They put that in 5-letter words. It was some kind of a machine. In the code clerk place was called a Sagaba. I don't know where that name come from, but they could decode the message, 5-letter messages that we took in, and they also coded the messages that we sent out. And every message that we sent or received, it may have 200 5-letter coded codes on it, but the last one and the first one was always matched, and none of the code clerks would ever tell me why. They were sworn to secrecy, but as far as Morse code, I could send or receive Morse code right now. I could spell your name in Morse code. Da 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 dit did it did it did I did it did I did it did I. Charlie. Yeah, we didn't have dot dashes. We had dit and da-das, what was taught us.
When the breakout began in July and then August, and you started racing across France.
Yeah.
Were you in a truck?
I was in the radio truck, actually, with the driver.
How many other people were in this unit that you were working with, in the immediate group? Dowling still with you?
Yeah, Dowling's still with me. And when we broke out, when the breakout come, we didn't go into Paris, but what is the city's name? It's you don't know Paris from that.
Versailles.
Yeah, that's where we went and set up headquarters.
At the palace at Versailles?
And let, was that what it was named? We set up headquarters there and they let the French 1st Division go in first. And then they had a big American parade there, but we wasn't in that parade either. But there was still shooting going on in Paris when we were in, Versailles is where we were at. And we got into an army barracks, German barracks is where we set up headquarters.
Did you ever see your general of your army, the First Army? That was Bradley, wasn't it?
Well, Bradley was first, but then he was the general of the 12th Army Group of 3 armies. And Hodges was the 1st Infantry Division's, as I recall, general. But we had a briefing, the 1st Division did, down in that compound by Patton. And he told us from a platform, he said, 75% of you that hit the beach won't be coming back. And then he had a percentage of how many of you will be wounded. I mean, he was blunt. He told you what he thought or what he knew and whatnot. But when we got in Paris, the next day, Lieutenant Kaiser was still in charge of our little headquarter group. Then the next day, we broke the lock on a storage shed there, and that was full of new bicycles, brand new German, French bicycles, and we each one got us one of them bicycles, and it must have been 40 of us that we circled all around the Arch of Triumph and the tower, and we stayed there. We carried them up them steps to those churches and whatnot. It must have been 100 steps, but we knew if we left that bicycle down there at the bottom that I was going to be gone when we come back. And we pulled them bicycles up those stairs and down them steps, and we kept them until we left Paris.
So you were basically touring Paris.
Yeah, trying to, yeah. I got 2 pictures in there that I sent my mother. I forgot about them. That are shows the Eiffel Tower and from Paris. Yeah. And
well, after Paris was liberated, where did you go?
we went into Belgium, and the headquarters was set up at Leige. First time.
Was that any different from setting up headquarters in Versailles?
A little bit, because about that time was when the buzz bombs started, and they sent quite a few of them in Liège, quite a lot of them. You know, you hear them putting along, and then when the putting stopped, you knew that thing was coming down, and then when the
did you see or hear any of those bombs drop?
Oh yeah, I saw them when they were dropped. Yeah, and
how close to the headquarters did they get?
I would guess within 2 miles, something like that. And then, of course, when the line moved forward, that's when we moved the headquarters to Spaa, Belgium.
Now, did any of your people in your company, the headquarters area, did you see any of them get wounded during this time between Normandy and Spaa?
Yeah, we had one boy. He was a Jeep driver. His name was Litwin from Iowa. He backed a Jeep off the road, and it was hit a mine and killed him. Yeah, tall, blonde fellow.
Did you see any mines your entire time?
No. I tell you, those engineers, even on D-Day, they went ahead up that hill, clearing mines, and made a path with tape. And the Germans had signs all on there, minus for mines, you know, and whatnot. But that's the only time I believe either one of them got killed. But when we were coming back, supposedly during the Battle of Bulge, Ardennes, when we were coming back, we got bombed, and our Colonel Andrews, he got killed, and several more. But I heard that coming, and between where he was at, there was a place maybe for us near to the alley, and there was a bridge that went across like a big canal to the road, and it really had been a gambling casino.
And this is in Spaa?
No, it was on the way out of Spaa.
Okay.
And going back to Liège, and the air was full of airplanes, just about. And the retreating Americans it was bumper to bumper, just about. And I heard this bomb when it left the airplane, and it wasn't very high. and it just happened to be a cellar with the things back, and I dove right down that cellar, and it was 3 guys guarding that bridge, and there wasn't enough of them left to send home when it was over with. And Lieutenant Andrews and about 6 more in this hotel room there, and I never went over to see him or what was, but they said that he didn't have a scar on him, that he died from concussion. Yep.
What happened to you?
I come on back up and went on over where our headquarters were.
Were you injured during the attack?
Only from my knees down. I scraped them knees, and the boys were telling me, go to sick bay. Go to the go and see a what you call them?
Doctor or surgeon?
Yeah, and get them fixed. I said no. They said, well, you'll get a Purple Heart. I said, from the people that I've seen from D-Day, I don't want no Purple Heart for that. And I did.
How bad was your legs? Were they bleeding all over the place? Or?
Well, it was just skin up and you know, skin taken off of them and whatnot. But
so you still could walk?
Mm-hmm.
You could still walk?
Oh, well, yeah, I could walk. Yeah. But and then a little bit after that, or not a little bit after that, but when the war ended, you know, they give you 5 more points for a Purple Heart on when you could come home. but I'm still glad I never, because I would have gotten one, but because it was enough, I guess, for to get a. But I didn't. After seeing the boys on D-Day.
Did anybody jump in that cellar with you during that attack?
No.
It was just you?
Yeah. I'll tell you what I was doing. I hadn't shaved for I don't know how long. And I had taken my helmet liner out of my helmet and put water in my helmet liner. In my helmet, and was trying to shave. I know what I was doing when that happened. Yeah, and some of them that were further away and saw that plane, they swore that was an American plane. Some of them.
You mentioned that even at D-Day, the Air Force didn't do so well. Did they seem to improve their performance as the campaigns continued?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Now, don't get me wrong. When you went, that day it was cloudy and foggy and rainy. But that day, as far as the bombers, they missed that beach by about 5 or 6 miles. When we got in there, it was just like it had been plowed up, and dead horses and dead cows and everything else. They plastered it, but they didn't hit the beach. But after that, the Air Force, yeah. We saw when the Air Force, it was 2 days in a row, they bombed our own boys and killed 600 one day and 300 some the other day. They killed General McNair. We were watching that parade of bombers come over. We were far enough back, but it was one place there I still could dream about that those bombers were in formation, those B-24s and B-17s, and it was just like one of these carnival things. Just one line of them bombers would come up to a certain line, and it was just like a duck shoot. I bet they knocked 10 down right in a row. And some of them got out with parachutes, some of them blew to our lines, some blew to the German lines.
You're in Spaa, Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
Is this about October or November?
or is it already December?
We got to Spaa. It had to be probably last October, 1st November, because they started their counteroffensives. The German did, I believe, on 16th of December.
Yes. Where were you on 16th of December?
We were in Spaa.
What were you doing?
We were still radio messaging.
So you were working that day?
Oh yeah.
You had mentioned that your brother was nearby.
Yeah. He come before that. He come before then, and because he was engaged in that in the Battle of Bulge too. Of course, he was. If anybody after D-Day, besides like us headquarters and whatnot, had an advantage of living, I would say it was in the artillery, because they were always, of course, artillery was shooting at them too, but I think they had more chance than the infantryman that was up front. Yeah.
When the attack came in Ardennes, did you see any Germans?
When what now?
When the attack came and charged?
Yeah. We.
What happened?
Well, most of us run. Is what we did. The headquarters was ordered out of Spaa. The headquarters was ordered out of Spaa. Well, the German attack never did get as far north as Spaa. It come through the Ardennes, which was south of Spaa.
Okay.
But they were expecting it to come on over to Spaa, but it never did. It went south to go through the Ardennes, and they were going to try to apparently take the same path that they took when they captured France earlier.
Right.
You know.
You mentioned you shot your gun during the Battle of the Bulge. When did that happen?
I'd rather not talk about that.
Okay. The Battle of the Bulge lasted a month nearly, before it was straightened back out.
Yeah, it was a good month. Yeah, but we were back to Liege from Spaa. We got back to Liege, and I never was in Spaa anymore after that. When we next place we went was.
Before we leave the Battle of the Bulge, news leaked out about the massacre at Normandy of the SS and the American prisoners. Yeah. How did that make you feel at that time?
Well, I never saw. I went by there where they were frozen by Normandy. I never saw a written order for that. But all the infantry divisions that were close to Normandy, it was rumored through the ranks, don't take no more prisoners. Don't take no more prisoners. And I know when we crossed the Rhine River that the rumor was, if you went through a city in Germany and you hollered down the cellar, if nobody answered, go on. If somebody answered, throw a grenade down there. That was how much it changed the American attitude. Normandy did. Yeah. And then it really got bad when we saw when we liberated Buckenwald. I was there the day after Buchenwald was liberated, right outside of Weimar.
Where did you cross the Rhine?
Right beside where the railroad bridge was. The engineers had put up a
Remagen Bridge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right where we crossed.
How long had the pontoon bridge been there before you crossed?
Oh, it had been there a good while.
Right.
They had that perimeter across the Rhine a good while before we went there. but I didn't. I went to Cologne, and well, we went to Cologne, and one of those castles there. I had a girlfriend back home, and I had some of the finest linen that was in that castle. Sheets, tablecloths and napkins to match, whatnot, and all the boys were sending something home from that castle. It was right on the Rhine.
Were you in a combat uniform this entire time, or were you in a Class A uniform?
We were in we wasn't in this. We were in like a fatigue. We had combat boots, and but the first army wasn't like Patton. You had to wear a tie if you were going in combat, but we were either in fatigues. Well, we never got into a uniform. I mean, like suntans or nothing like that. No.
Did you ever see a German tank in action that had not been destroyed already?
Yeah, in Normandy, behind those hedgerows. Yeah. I saw them destroy it. Yeah.
Can you describe that process? Of what you
Well,
saw?
we were in one hedgerow, and it was an open field, and they had tanks set up in each corner of that open field, and we saw them until our aircraft knocked them out. Yeah.
Okay. As the battle of the Bulge ended and you moved forward, you said you went into Germany sometime in February or April?
We were across the Rhine in February anyway. I'm pretty sure we were across the Rhine in February. Whenever that bridge was put there, we wasn't too far behind it, because they had that big surrender in the Ruhr thing. 300,000 Germans surrendered. You could take a jeep, and they did it, and put two boys walking along when that Ruhr surrender was. Walk around, put one man on one side, and let that jeep drive real slow, and fill that up with German pistols in a half a mile.
Because they're all throwing them in.
Yeah, they're throwing them away. Yeah. I had a P38 German pistol, excuse me, and a Luger, and I had them underneath my pillow on the Queen Mary coming back, and somebody got them.
You mentioned that you got to Buchenwald the day after it was liberated.
Yeah.
Did you see the Jewish and other prisoners there?
Oh, yeah. Well, that a lot of those guards had changed to prisoners' uniforms or things, and the prisoners that had been prisoners there pointed them out, and they were shot. The Americans shot them.
Did you see that happening, or just?
Yeah. The guards, the ones that had been, that was bad as D-Day. It really was. And they didn't know, those that had been there, well, there wasn't nothing but skinny bones. They were skeletons, was all. They couldn't even get out of their bunks. And the colonel there that was in charge of the occupation of Weimar, he made all the citizens march to Buchenwald and go through that camp and help bury the dead.
Did you see that?
I saw them marching towards Buchenwald. I didn't see them in Buchenwald.
When you were in Germany and you talked to the civilians, first of all, did you talk to the German civilians much? And if you did, what was their reaction to you?
Well, after we stayed in Weimar. That's when the order come from Eisenhower. You know, they had met up with the Russians down, you know, the Danube, I believe it was, or somewhere in there. That's when the order come for the Americans to stop. We could have been in Berlin, but he did the right thing, because the Russians must have lost 2 million soldiers in Berlin to taking it. But we stayed in Weimar until the war was over, and then I'm sure there had been American intelligence in Berlin before we went in Berlin. But I was in the 8th vehicle that went in Berlin. But at Magdeburg, before you get to Berlin, we got that far when they said they were going to let us in. And the Russians held us there, this convoy, for 3 days and 3 nights there before they would let us in Berlin. And of course, they cleaned up a lot of mess in that time, but they didn't clean up very much of it. And I don't know how somebody had found this house for us. I guess everything around it was tore up. We got a picture of the house in there where we stayed in Berlin. And,
you mentioned these different places that you set up your headquarters, including in Normandy, Versailles, Leige, Spaa, Weimar. Where did you sleep when you set up the headquarters? Were you in tents, or were you building houses?
We just were in tents until they found somebody went ahead and found us billets, you know. But in Belgium, believe it or not, we stayed in a convent for a week, and the sisters there washed our clothes for us, and we slept on the cement floor. And you know, long about in April, they issued us sleeping bags after the war was over. Yeah, they did.
Did you ever have to have a family evacuate their home so that you and your fellows could occupy it?
This house that we were in Germany, there was one lady there. I guess she was in her 30s, and I guess we had an interpreter, but they told her she could go and live in the basement, but we were taking the house. And that's where she stayed until I left Berlin. Yeah.
Did you talk much to the civilians in Germany?
Yeah. We talked a whole lot with them, and we had one guy there that was a Jeep driver. The Russians hadn't been paid, I don't think, for 3 years, and if you had a Mickey Mouse watch, they would give you $1,200 in German francs for it, or in invasion money. And we had a Jeep driver there, and a lieutenant. His name was Skenazy, and he was in the finance department. And this Jeep driver's name was McDermott. And before McDermott come home, he bought a bicycle factory in Belgium where they made them, and married a Belgian girl, and come home to get his discharge, and was going to go back to Belgium. That's the last I ever heard of it. Yeah.
Did you what was your opinion at the time of the Russians that you met?
Terrible.
Why?
Well, they wasn't nothing but a bunch of filth for start with. They looked like Mongolians. I think he sent the ones out of Siberia. I think he just sacrificed them for to take Berlin. They were shorter than the Hispanics that you see around here now, or the Venezuela, or not Venezuela, what's the other one's name south of us, where they have in Florida?
Cuban.
Anyway, they were all shot, but within a week after we got in Berlin, he had them pulled out and more stately dressed replacements sent in there in Berlin. But that park in Berlin, I forgot what it was called. It was the biggest central park, I guess, in New York. That water pond in there was full of Germans where they committed suicide and whatnot.
Did you make it to the bunker, Hitler's bunker?
Yes, I did. But we had to give up a carton of cigarettes for the Russian captain to let us in. I got a picture of him right in there.
Did you go down inside it?
No, they wouldn't let us inside. But I saw where he burnt, where he was burned. Yeah.
Where were you when news was let out that VE Day had happened?
We were in Weimar. I got a picture in there of me in front of our radio truck holding the Stars and Stripes. It says, what's it say? Germans quit?
Nazi surrender.
Not Nazis surrender or something or other. I got a picture of it in there.
Did you celebrate?
I'm telling you, if the Germans had just held back two armies, or an army, and attacked the day after they announced VE Day, they could have went anywhere they wanted. They could have went right back through to the English Channel if they'd wanted to. Because I never saw so much whiskey and wine that had been saved for that. Our teletype operator, we had one of them too. We had more than one of them. But our teletype operator, that night, he was from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. And he could run that teletype like crazy. So by that time, the war correspondents were sending some of their messages by teletype. And we were doing mostly Army stuff, communications. His name was Jimmy Sink. He was sending messages so fast, and they were feeding him so much to drink out of a canteen can. He was bunking with me in this hotel in Weimar, and he just passed out and fell right off his chair. And the next morning, when I looked over at him, he had upchucked. He had curly hair, and his hair was sticking right up like one of these native Africans. You could put a bone right through it, and it would have stuck right there. It took him 2 days to get over that. He said, everything I drink tastes just like alcohol. And it was all over. I mean, it was all, I didn't drink, but well, 2/3, I would bet, of the American Army was drunk that night.
But you didn't drink?
No, sir.
You mentioned you had cigarettes to get in to see the area of the bunker. Had you taken up smoking?
No. But every week we would have a ration day, and they would give you so many razor blades, so many bars of candy, and so much of this, and at the end of the line would be the cigarette man, and he would give everybody a carton of cigarettes. I always sold mine. But this guy McDermott, he would know when that was coming off, and he would be waiting to the end of that line to buy, and he would give you $200 for a carton of cigarettes. And that night he wore coveralls, and he had buttons that went around the bottom of them. He would stuff himself full of candy, cigarettes, anything where you got in that ration line. He would give you $5 for a little roll of those lifesavers. And if you had a watch you wanted to sell, go help Mom, Donald, please. He would he just got rich off of it, and see his everybody was selling something to the Russians, and the army got knew that something was going on, you know. So they stopped everything so that you couldn't send anything home more than what your paycheck was for. And everybody had been claiming they won it in a poker game. You know, everybody had won, nobody had lost, and they were all trying to send money home. But
How much stuff did you send home?
a lot, a whole lot. Donald has 2 World War I swords where they're all engraved in silver. We were going through a hunting club. I found a double-barrel shotgun over and under with a rifle underneath of it. That was all engraved in silver. I took that all apart, put it in sheets and put oil on it, and sent that home. I sent, I sent a lot of stuff home. I sent, I don't know how many daggers and whatnot. I give them all away. And let's see, what else did I send home? Oh, I sent a whole German uniform home. Helmet, no.
How did you get the uniform?
Out of a barracks. And when I got home, my mother had turned that helmet upside down, put dirt in it, and had planted flowers in it. That's the truth. Yeah, if she was living, she'd tell you the same thing today. And I don't know what I did with the rest of that uniform. I don't know. It got left down the Hunting Creek, I know that.
Well, the war in Europe is over in May
Yeah.
1945, but
You
it's
had,
not in Japanese, not against the Japs.
you had to have 125 points to be eligible to come home.
How many points you have?
I had about 80 some. You got 3 points for each month in the United States. You got 5 points for each month overseas. You got 5 points for each medal you had. If you were married, seems to me, I don't know whether it was 8 or 12 points that you got. But it didn't take long for the point system to start going down. And when it got to 85, I had enough. But they stamped right by when I inquired about it, they said right by your name is a thing says no, what did it say? Until replaced. In other words, I couldn't come home until I was replaced by another radio operator. So that's how that worked.
How long did you stay in Berlin?
This is going to be another tale too. You saw that baseball picture in there, didn't you? Well, the First Army headquarters then was back at Wiesbaden, where it still is, or where the Army headquarters is for Germany. And one day they sent for me, and Lieutenant Kaiser was up to was in. He said, Louis, I didn't know what I was getting called there for. I hadn't done anything wrong. But anyway, he said, Louis, I just got a teletype from Wiesbaden. He said, they are trying to get their baseball team redone that they had in England. He said, now, you can stay here or I'll send you back if you want to go. So when I said, well, I don't know, this is kind of sudden. He said, make up your mind and let me know tomorrow. And I'll do whatever you want to do. So that night, or early part that afternoon or whatnot, I thought myself, well, I can say goodbye to all my friends here tonight, or before tomorrow, before I leave. And and then I'll be able to see some of the ones that we were with in England back at Wiesbaden before they get to go home. So the next day I went and told him, I said, Lieutenant Kaiser, I believe I will go back to Wiesbaden to see a lot of the friends that I had in England before they get gone or I get gone. He said, well, it's strictly up to you. So I said, well, I believe I'll go. So he said, well, be ready by so-and-so. He sent me from Berlin back to Wiesbaden in a command car, all by myself and the driver. And I got back there, and I got a picture taken there of one, I think that's out there, of one of the radio operators that never went ashore D-Day and just stayed with the headquarters thing. Roy Munn, he was the one that was from Illinois. And then I stayed in Wiesbaden until until the war was over in Japan, and I didn't get home until I got home December the 5th of 45, and come back on the Queen Mary, and all those ports down there were named after cigarettes where you were coming home. Camp Camel, Camp Lucky Strike, Camp so-and-so. You know, I was at Camp Camel, and then they sent a group of us, well, it was a real big group, back over to England for to wait for the next trip for the Queen Mary. And I believe the Queen Mary, I believe that left, I think it was Lowell's birthday. And I didn't even know Lowell, my wife, then. But I think it was on the 27th of November. And it only took us 4.5 days to come across.
How was that ship versus the
We
other
hit
one?
one storm in the middle, and I was in the bow of that thing. They had bunks 5 high that you had to climb up to, and I was in the bow of that thing. I didn't get seasick, but boy, it took that thing a long time to come down before it leveled off. I never forgot that. And when we got in New York, well, that night, I knew we were landing in New York Harbor the next morning. And by 1 o'clock that night, you couldn't get to that rail. It was solid packed. That rail was packed. We're going to wait until we got in there, and we got in there, I guess, about 9 o'clock. And the bow of that thing was over the road there, part of it, and a lot of them knew that their kin was coming home on that Queen Mary, and it was no way traffic was going to get on that road, and it was about an 8-way traffic, I think, double thing, and they started going off. Well, they had already told us at rotation that we were going to be going off, and we had 18,000. It was 18,000 on that, American troops, and 1,800 English worked on it, and everybody that went on the Queen Mary going over seas and coming back must have had their initials carved in that railing. Everybody, and the date that they went. And we got back to Camp Kilmer. When we got off, it was dark. They had 3 ramps going off that thing. Of course, they had to call everybody's name when they went off. It was after dark when we got off of there. And then we had to take another little ferry boat to New Jersey to Camp Kilmer. But I'll tell you one thing, it wasn't anything in this country that they didn't have there for you to eat that night. Or I guess that had been going on for months then, because war was over in May and I didn't get on till December. Got to Camp Kilmer, and they already had us fixed on the Queen Mary, the group that would be going to Fort Meade the ones that would be going to other forts to be discharged and whatnot. So you come off in that group, and the next day we were sent to Fort Meade, and I was discharged on the 5th. And
How'd you get home?
they give me $8 and something money for it to come home from Baltimore.
Was that enough?
Yeah, but at that time, when you got discharged, they give you $100. They sent you $100 the first month after you were discharged, and $100 the second month after you were discharged. And it wasn't in check. I mean, when they give it to us there, it was at Fort Meade. It was in cash, and I had learned the names 3 or 4 of them, and when we got to Baltimore, they carried us to Baltimore. Anybody wanted to go to Baltimore, they carried a bus. And they said, well, let's us that know each other go in a bar here and get one last drink. Well, I wanted to get to that bus station, I tell you. But anyway, we went in, but we all had one, but I didn't drink, never have drank. And that's where we split up, and I come to Fort Meade, and I was discharged on the 5th and took a bus to Salisbury. I was going with a girlfriend there then, and in fact her father was a bus driver for the Eastern Shore. I forgot what that was called, Stardust, I believe it was. And we come home come to Parksley on the bus. It was 4 daybreak. It was daybreak when we got off there to the old drugstore, and wasn't anything open or anything except the railroad station. I went over there and I asked a man that I didn't know. I asked him, can I use your telephone? And he had been a World War soldier, but I didn't know it then. And he said, certainly, son, come right here.
Were you still in your uniform?
Uh-huh.
Were you still in a uniform?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she was with me and had my duffel bag. There's Allen coming to the door, Don. And I called...
Here's the appetizer for you.
Look at that.
They're not very fat.
Thank you.
None but silks, but they'll at least you'll get an appetizer out of it.
Thank you a lot, Alan.
Can't ask for any more than that.
Thank you.
And I called a man that I knew there that worked for the telegraph company. When I left, he was the only one in the country that had a telephone. So I called him, and he stuttered a little bit. And I got him up, and I said, Mr. Clarence, this is Paul Lewis. Honey, where are you at? He stuttered. I can hear him now on that phone. I said, I'm out to the railroad station. Will you come and get me? Where'd you say you were? I said, I'm out here to the railroad station. I'll be right there. He said, I'll be right there. And he had a Pontiac a car then, and the hood of that was as long as some of the cars are now. But he come and got us, and carried us home down Hunting Creek, and my father was helping killing hogs that day. But they didn't know I was coming. They knew I had wrote them and told them not writing me anymore because I knew I was going to be on my way home, and they knew that I was coming, but they didn't know. I didn't call them from New Jersey or anything. They didn't until he told everybody before he come out to pick us up, and that was the end of my war story.
Was your dad was he there happy?
Oh yeah, oh yes, my blessed. Everybody in the village was. Everybody in that little village. Well, it wasn't over.
Who else was with you? Just you, right?
Just me. No, the girlfriend that I had in Salisbury, Maryland. She worked in a bank up there.
Right.
But that didn't work out. And 2 years later, I married Lola, and we've been married going on 59 years now. So that hasn't worked out.
I want you to think back, and I know this may be a hard question for you to answer, but do you have any regrets about your service?
None at all. None at all. No, I don't have any regrets about any of my service. I think right now, I think we ought to have something in this country that I don't mean to go to Iraq, but for at least a year to get some kind of training. And I don't mean get out here and shoot machine guns and that, but I mean get oriented to what we went through and what they're going through now. And I mean, it's so much going on now that I just despair for a youngster.
How did the Army change you?
I think it made me from a boy to a man, more or less. But now I will say this: for I guess a year after I was discharged and home, I just wasn't in focus with with what was going on. I mean, I wasn't nervous or anything or brainwashed or anything, but I was just. I think it took me a year to get over what I had seen and whatnot.
Did you have nightmares?
I still have nightmares. Yeah, I have nightmares at least once a week service, but I know what causes that. I watch a lot of the History Channel, and Donald still brings me a lot of history books about World War II. I've got enough books in there to start a library where the two boys have given me. I must have a dozen books about D-Day.
Do you think well, first of all, did you join a veterans organization after the war?
VFW, but
was that immediately when you got back, or did you wait?
It was pretty much after we got back. The veterans in this area took a grammar school that had been closed. It was a nice building, and we fixed that all up, sanded the floors, and had a jukebox there, and booths, and all kinds of recreation, ping pong, and pool tables. And, then they wanted to get beer license. Got beer license. And then they wanted to know if they had lockers in there. They wanted to get a permit for you to have your own bottle. And they got that. And that ruined our VFW. The last time Lowell and I went down there, we got met to the door with two members up chucking out. I told Lowell, I said, turn right around. We're going home. This is the last of my VFW. It was VFW 5864, I believe. It's still in effect on Exmoor, but it's not where it was then.
Did the military affect what you became after the war, what your career became?
I guess you could say, although I never did anything wrong that I knew of before I went in service, I guess it gave me more respect for discipline, But everybody was out picking up cigarette butts. I said, I'm not going to pick them cigarette butts up. I don't smoke them. He said, well, come on with me then. And he carried me into Lieutenant Kaiser. And when he told Lieutenant Kaiser what he brought me in there for, Lieutenant Kaiser told him to go on out. And he told me, he said, look, Louis, go back out there and just make out you're picking them up. Don't pick them up. So I guess it made me more disciplined you know, by being in the service. Although I never remember either one of my parents ever touching me. Never.
Did you take advantage of the GI Bill to go to school?
No, but I took. We did take. Lowell and I took advantage of the VA for the buy this house. We paid $5,000 for it. The payments were $33.13 a month. That included the interest, principal, taxes, and insurance. I was working for the light company. I worked for them for 39 years.
Do you think your training in the Army helped you be prepared to work for the light company?
Partially, by working with Morse code and whatnot. I started as stock clerk and ended up as a meter technician for the last 25 years. Fixing meters and testing meters and all kind of meter work.
Immediately after the war, they had a program called the 5220s.
Another story. My buddy and I, this was a buddy from he was in the Pacific during the war, but they had an office at Exmoor down in Northampton County, and we went down and applied for it, and he all we had to do was sign up, and we would go every 2 weeks and get for a $40 check. We were looking for jobs. He had worked over in the shipyard till he got drafted, and so we went. I guess maybe 2 months we did that, and we got down there to Exmoor, and we went in one day, and we both knew the man that was that lad. He was tall man, thin man. Oh man, and the boy that I was with, he wasn't bad or anything, but when we went in that day, his name's Mr. Parks, I still remember. He said, "Boy's got a job for you," and Irvin, his name was Irvin. Irvin said, "What's that, Mr. Parks?" He said, "They were constructing Summer Road 13 then." Cement. He said, "I got you a job working with these contractors." And Irvin said, "Well, how much does that pay, Mr. Park?" He says, "It pays $22.50 a week." Irvin said, "Am I being taken now?" Irvin said, "What do you think we are, damn fools?" He said, "We're looking for a job." He said, "You're offering us, telling us we got take a job at $2.50 a week more than we can get for 52 weeks." He said, "That's right, son." He said, I'm supposed to see to it that you get a job, and that's what my orders are." And Irvin, he got angry then. He said, "Well, we're not going to take that." Well, he said, "Boys, you can't sign up." And he was behind a counter. I never saw anybody so quick in my life, I don't think. Irvin reached right over that counter and grabbed him by the neck and pulled his face right to him. He said, "Tell me where you were at such a date." And Mr. Parks, of course, he didn't know where he was. He said, Irvin told him, "Well, I can tell you where I was at. I was on this island. We fighting Japanese." He said, "Now where were you such this day?" He said, "I don't know." Irvin said, "Well, I know where I was at. I was on this island." He called his name, you know. He was about to choke the man. He had him by the back of the neck. And Mr. Parks said, wait a minute, boys." He said, Come here to the counter and sign your name here." We never had any more trouble with him at all. But we never got it for no 52 weeks. We both had jobs before 52 weeks was up.
During your time in the service, did you carry anything for good luck?
No,
You
not the
weren't
dog tags.
Just dog tags.
I can tell you what they were, 33521463. Now, ain't wrong with my computer. Or 33, 52, 14, 63. Some places you had to get your check. You had to tell them 2 numbers at a time. Some you just rattled it off.
Did you pull any pranks on anybody in the Army? Or were any pranks pulled on you?
No, I don't think so. My best pal that I had that would like to play baseball with, that was the one from Roy. But when I was in Berlin and ahead of him, he was back to Wiesbaden, but he was a radio operator too. He was one of the original ones that went from California. And he knew that I could beat him playing checkers or ping pong or pool. He knew that I could, but he would say, "Come on, let's." I said, "Roy, I just don't feel like that or something." He'd say, "Come on, I'll bet you a quarter a game." He would pay for me to play with him, you know. But I would, when one of us had money, the other one had money when we were together, and.
But otherwise, it was really businesslike.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember even when we were in Atlantic City. I was rooming with a boy up there that he was one of the ones that went from Camp Leige up there, and he had only been married about 2 weeks. And every night when we would bunk down, the last thing I would hear was him crying. I tell you, her name was Grace, and she would come up to see him every weekend. But when we were there, they gave us 2 pairs of shoes. One pair would shine, and the other pair was nothing but rough leather. And to get a pass, you had to make that rough leather shine. Oh, I'm telling you, he worked on them one night right after the other. And one night somebody did take his pair of shoes and change them for a pair that hadn't been shined. But he's still living. He's the one that went to Alaska, to Kiska and up in the Aleutians.
Did you keep a personal diary during your service time?
No.
Did you ever think at that time that you were in the midst of making history?
I thought with what I saw going across the English Channel and everything. See, they had all kinds of barrage balloons in England. I mean, everywhere they had them. They had their, well, we called them wax. What did they call them? Wrens in England. And they had them everywhere. And I'm telling you, going across that channel, all those boats had those balloons over them. They did it in England to keep them from coming down strafing, of course. But maybe before D-Day, I think we thought it was going to be the biggest thing that had happened in World War II. We were led to believe that in a way.
You mentioned that you watched a lot of History Channel, a lot of World War II stuff.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a time you thought maybe you were in the picture?
That I was what?
That you were in the picture?
I have thought that. Yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
During your service time, do you recall seeing photographers around making newsreels?
Mm-hmm. I have a picture in there that was in the Richmond Times. My sister lived at Newport News during the war, and she knew a lady in Richmond that knew my name, that knew Estelle, and she knew she had a brother named Paul Lewis, and she saw this picture in the Richmond Times and sent it to my sister, editor of the Richmond Times, and it was taken after Leige was taken, the first time, or the time that Leige was taken, and somebody come and called is there anybody here from Virginia? And I said, yeah, I'm from Virginia. They said, well, there's a photographer right here that wants to take somebody's picture from Virginia. And that's how I got it. That's how it was just to happen so that I got that picture. It's in there on that table, I think.
You mentioned you met up with one of your Mr. Dowling. What's his name?
Dow?
Dow. You met up with Mr. Dow one time
Yeah.
shortly after the 50th anniversary.
And he had, when he come here, he was getting treatments from stomach cancer. And the doctors in Maine had sent to some clinic or some cancer clinic in Florida where he was going, and he was carrying his papers on his medical history and whatnot with him, and that's the last I've ever heard from him. I have thought several times to call because I'm sure. Well, he told me one of his boys was named Robert Dowell III, but I've never called him or I've never heard from Bob since.
Have you ever attended any other reunions?
No. No.
Had you ever contacted or been contacted by anybody else that you had met while you were in service?
No. Roy Mum and I, when we first were discharged, we wrote back and forth to each other, but it's been quite a while now since I talked with him. I tried to get him to meet me. We used to, my wife and I and the kids when they were young, we used to go to Gatlinburg in the Smokies every fall, and I tried to get him to meet us and his family, meet us in Smokies, and he just told me, he said, Paul, right now I got 2 boys and I'm helping them pay for 2 homes, and he said I just can't do it. He was a neon technician before he went into service, and when he went back, when he was discharged, he did the same thing. Or that's what he took up. He lives in Urbana-Champaign, where University of Chicago is.
Do you know other World War II vets that are still alive in the community? Personally?
I know one. I know the one just about 2 miles up the road. Excuse me, up the road here. That the one that I was telling you about, his name's Alva Kilmer. That we went into service the same day, and he was the one when we left Atlantic City. He went to Florida, and then from Florida, believe it or not, he went to Alaska, and then he was in the invasion up there. Well, one of the places they found where the Japanese had evacuated before they went to retake it.
Do you ever get together with anybody else who was in the Army and just talk about things?
Not really, not now.
You're a vanishing breed, you know that.
Yeah, I know.
And my son told me to tell you, his name is Javan, he said to tell you that you're here, you and your compatriots are his hero. But I'm going to ask you this question, okay, and I think I know your answer anyways, because every vet's told me the same. Do you consider yourself a hero?
No.
Who is the hero?
Huh?
Who, in your opinion,
the
are
ones
the heroes?
we left in off Omaha Beach.
Thank you for your interview. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
No, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing too. I will. I'd like to say that, and your wife, and someday maybe it'll mean something to somebody. I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. It's been a pleasure.
Now.